Chapter 658. Since Nini was still young and her soul had not yet stabilized, Su Len did not enlighten her too early. The best time to start learning was from the age of 10, but before that, he could let her know about all kinds of wizardry knowledge. At first, Su Len thought taking care of a young child would be troublesome, but to his surprise, Nini was very smart and sensible. She didn't need him to take care of her at all. She even took care of him, the young master. In the end, Su Len couldn't take it anymore. He spent money to hire a maid to take care of their daily life. Then, he began to teach the little girl how to read. The first language she learned was the common language of the continent, then the Nesser language, the demon language, the heavenly language, and the Byron language. These were the basics of wizardry. A qualified wizard would need to master more than 10 languages. After all, a lot of magic information was recorded in these languages. The little girl was very smart and had a good memory. She could remember all the knowledge Su Len taught her 2 or 3 times. Although she was not as good as Su Len and Hathaway, there was not much difference. Seeing this, Su Len was very surprised. This little girl was a potential wizard. After living in this wizard town for about a month, the long-awaited wizard trade fair was finally going to start. After telling Nini to stay at home to study and not go out, Su Len went to the trading hall in the wizard market. In order to participate in the trade fair, one had to be a wizard and buy a ticket. The ticket price was not cheap. It was equivalent to 10,000 kinners worth of magic crystals or gems. Of course, this was not a problem for Su Luen. He arrived at the trade fair hall. As expected of the trade fair held once every 5 years. Su Luen hurriedly looked around. There were about 300 wizards in the hall. Although half of them were low-grade wizards, there were only a few high-grade wizards. As for legendary wizards, Su Len did not see any of them. Legendary wizards were very busy, and more than 80% of them were otakus. There was almost no one like Su Len who liked to wander around. Normally, legendary wizards would rarely participate in this kind of trade fair, but they would usually send their disciples or representatives. After all, this sort of trade fair, which was held once every few years, would often have some good items. As a new face, Su Len did not have many acquaintances at this trade fair, so no one came to disturb him. Su Len found a quiet place to sit down and waited quietly. After sitting down, Su Len kept observing the wizards around him. Many of them were obviously regulars here. They were chatting with their friends and introducing other wizards from time to time. Su Len was obviously interested in the news as well. He was eavesdropping on the conversation. Soon, he had a general understanding of the adepts around him. A few of them were very strong in Beijing, and they were backed by legendary wizards. Most of them were disciples of legendary wizards, and you could tell from their arrogant expressions. The highest profile wizard was actually a direct descendant of a legendary wizard. This wizard was a grade 4 wizard and was the son of a legendary wizard. It was important to note that after advancing into an adept, the fertility of an adept would greatly decrease. This kind of fertility would become more and more difficult to achieve. After becoming a legendary wizard, the chances of having a descendant would be even lower. It was 1,000 times harder for a legendary wizard to have a descendant than a normal person. However, once a descendant was born, they would receive a lot of benefits. Their aptitude would be at least grade 4, and even grade 5 would not be rare. "Who is that adept?" one of the adepts asked softly. Another wizard followed his gaze and quickly whispered, "That's Meister from the Brandon family. His father is the Sage of Fire. Don't offend him. This guy is very vengeful, and he has a legendary wizard behind him. It can be said that no one dares to offend him." With that wizard's whisper, Su Len roughly understood the basic information of this Meister. Meister's father, the Sage of Fire, spent countless resources and finally succeeded in giving birth to a child, which was Meister in front of him. To have a son at such an old age and to be a sorcerer's seed, one could imagine how much the Sage of Fire doted on him. Moreover, he himself was a grade 4 sorcerer with great strength. There were also a few wizards who were representatives of other wizard organizations. It could be said that the qualifications of the entire trade fair were very high. The trade fair has begun. Just as Su Len was observing, the trade fair finally began. As the host of this trade fair, the representative of this wizard fair was the first to walk on stage. It was a curvaceous blonde beauty. Her face was beautiful, and her skin was white. She could be said to be very beautiful, and her strength was at the high grade. As the host, it was natural to throw out a brick to attract the jade. The blonde beauty walked on stage and directly asked someone to take out 3 brocade boxes and open them. One of the boxes contained a purple soul crystal, the second box contained a small green sapling, and the last box contained an earth crystal. Seeing the earth crystal, Su Len was a little surprised. This kind of thing was rare. You are all wizards, so you don't need me to pass on the message. There are 3 treasures in front of you. These treasures can be exchanged for water elemental crystals of the same grade or magic items of the same grade. The market in front of them also did not accept kinner, only magic items. Earth crystal? Good stuff. Just as everyone was about to bid, a voice said, "Just in time. I'll take it." "Sir, I need this earth crystal. I'll use this to exchange for it. What do you think?" As he spoke, the wizard took out a fist-sized magic pearl. The magic pearl was full of water vapor and energy. It was obviously a high-quality magic pearl. This magic pearl is a special product of our Wizard Academy. Only high-grade magic clams can breed it. It's a very good water elemental material. The blonde beauty nodded and said, "It is indeed very good. How many are you willing to exchange for it?" The wizard thought for a moment and said, 10 magic pearls of the same grade as this one, or not lower than this one. What do you think?" Su Len looked at the magic pearl carefully. This kind of magic pearl would cost about 100,000 kinner worth of magic materials. 10 of them were equivalent to 1 million kinner. Too low. At least 12. The magus hesitated for a moment before nodding his head in agreement. 12 it is. Chapter 659. Magic pearls of this quality were good stuff. They could be used to make some magic tools or set up some large-scale magic runes or magic runes. However, these were not their most important uses. The most important use of magic pearls was to make youth potions. This potion could not increase the power of the will or break through bottlenecks. However, it had one effect: eternal youth. After taking this potion, one's body would remain active. As long as one did not die, they would always be in a youthful state. In addition to these effects, the youth potion also had some beautifying effects, such as making the skin white and tender. Although this potion could not increase the power of the will, it was not cheap at all. It could be said that the witches were crazy about this potion. It had to be said that no matter the time, women's pursuit of beauty was crazy. In the eyes of many wizards, this potion was completely a waste of resources, but the price was shockingly high. Seeing that the first round of transactions had been completed, the next 2 items were quickly bid on. The high-grade soul crystal was exchanged for a magic wand, and the remaining sapling was a magic willow. It was a plant-type magic beast that was similar to a tray ant. It could be used to guard a house, and the trunk of this magic willow was a very good enchantment material. However, the prerequisite was that this magic willow had to be raised. This plant-type magic beast usually took dozens or even hundreds of years to grow. If it was not a wizard organization or a wizard family, basically no one would raise this kind of creature. After the first person completed the transaction, the venue became lively. Then, the second wizard went on stage and took out the item he was going to trade. It was a very simple item. Just a magic scroll. However, the items that could be traded here were not cheap. The Heart of Lava meditation technique. It can increase the affinity of shadow and fire elemental energy. It has a 7th circle, an 8th circle, and a legendary spell. I'll trade it for a bottle of elemental essence. As soon as the voice of this magus fell, the entire venue immediately began to scramble for it. Elemental essence could be called a heavenly treasure. Its function was to increase a magus elemental affinity and improve a magus aptitude. Of course, it could only be raised to grade 4, but even so, it was still very precious. In the end, the Heart of Lava meditation technique was purchased by a magus family at a high price. Not only did they pay an elemental essence, but they also paid 100,000 kinner worth of magical materials. After that, one magus after another went up to trade. There were even 1 or 2 items that caught Sullen's attention. Although these items were precious, they were not the lava crystals that Su Len wanted. As time went by, there were fewer and fewer wizards who had yet to make a deal. Su Len was getting a little anxious. However, at this moment, Su Len suddenly heard a wizard on the stage say, 1 top-grade lava crystal for true dragon blood essence or a bloodline of the same level. Hearing this, Sullen's eyes lit up. He didn't expect that what he wanted would really appear. As soon as the top-grade lava crystal appeared, many wizards wanted to buy it. One of them took out the blood essence of a grade 4 frost Quetzalcoatlus and some other things, but he was still rejected. Another wizard took out a bottle of legendary sea monster blood. Seeing that the person was interested, Su Len immediately took out a bottle of red blood and said, "1 bottle of white dragon blood from the ancient dragon stage in exchange for this lava crystal." White dragon blood from the ancient dragon stage. Hearing Sullen's words, a trace of surprise flashed across the wizard's face. He couldn't wait and said, "As long as it's confirmed that it's white dragon blood from the ancient dragon stage, we can make the exchange immediately." True dragon blood was very rare, but it wasn't impossible. For example, finding some dragon creatures to purify the blood, but there was a limit to this kind of purification. In order to obtain true dragon blood, it had to be at least a legendary dragon descendant. Sullen's bottle of white dragon blood was from the ancient dragon stage, and its effect was far stronger than that of ordinary legendary dragon blood. It could be said that it had exceeded the target that he wanted to exchange. Morton looked at the bottle of dragon blood that contained rich energy in Sullen's hand, and his eyes were full of enthusiasm. He thought to himself, "Dragon blood from the ancient dragon stage. Although it's from a white dragon, it's still not bad. It'll definitely be good to use it to make dragon blood potions. With my qualifications, it's impossible to rely on a wizard to advance to legendary. However, if I have this bottle of dragon blood, the success rate of advancing to legendary by relying on a dragon disciple warlock is still very high. A legendary dragon disciple warlock is not inferior to a legendary wizard in the slightest. Moreover, he can establish a warlock family and even control a country behind the scenes." At the thought of this, Morton's heart was full of enthusiasm. He smiled and said, "No problem at all. I agree to the exchange." As he said that, he handed the top-grade lava crystal to Su Len, ready to exchange for the dragon blood. "Wait." Su Len stopped. "The value of my bottle of dragon blood is higher than your lava crystal. You can't afford the difference." This. Morton was a little hesitant, but after glancing at the bottle of dragon blood, he immediately nodded and agreed. "I can compensate you with 20,000 kinners worth of enchanted materials." Su Len nodded and agreed. Since the price had been discussed, the two quickly completed the exchange after confirming that there was no problem with the item. Su Len held the fist-sized lava crystal in his hand and sighed in relief. After the exchange was completed, Su Len was not in a hurry to leave here. He had to bring some gifts back for a long trip, didn't he? Otherwise, the few people at home would be in a mess. Su Len already had a target. The enchanted pearls that the wizard used to exchange were pretty good. Although Hathaway, Chris, Alex, and Karina were all long-lived species and could be regarded as eternal youth, no woman would refuse to become more beautiful. Therefore, Su Len planned to buy or trade some enchanted pearls from the wizard. Soon, Su Len found the wizard and used 100 milliliters of spring water and some other magical materials to exchange for 5 enchanted pearls. It was not that he did not want to exchange for more, but the key was that these were the last 5 enchanted pearls he had. The production of enchanted pearls was not high. It was mainly produced by a special kind of enchanted clam. If one could obtain an enchanted clam, it was equivalent to obtaining an endless source of wealth. Of course, enchanted clams also had a limited lifespan. There were many of them in the hands of the sea folk. Su Len found some pearl clams in the sea of the eastern continent and wanted to cultivate enchanted clams. Unfortunately, the experiment ended in failure. Chapter 660. After the trade, Su Len left the venue. Many wizards who were returning from a rewarding journey were in a hurry. Many of them did not stop and left the wizard town directly. After all, there were always people in this world who wanted to do business without any cost. Just a moment ago, he noticed that a few wizards had left with the other wizards. Obviously, these people were going to leave this place and make a move. When Su Len returned to the courtyard, the little girl was still studying in the study room. When she saw Su Len coming back, the little girl immediately came up to him. "Uncle, you're back." "Yes, pack your things. We're going home tomorrow," Su Len said as he reached out and carried the little girl up. "Home, home." Su Len pinched the little girl's nose and said with a smile, "You've been studying hard. Before we go home, I'll take you out to play." The little girl was only 8 years old this year. She was at the age where she liked to play. During this period of time, she had been suppressing her studies. When she heard that Su Len wanted to take her out to play, she immediately cheered. Su Len brought the little girl out of the courtyard. This guy had been in the courtyard for almost a month, and it was getting impatient. When it saw Su Len was about to go out, it immediately bit Sullen's sleeve and refused to let go. Seeing that the Pegasus was acting like a rascal, Su Len had no choice but to let it go. The two of them strolled around the market together. The wizard market was very busy. Other than the things that wizards used, there were also many things that ordinary people needed. After all, wizards also needed to eat. The little girl had been bored for a long time. When she came out, she was very active. She was holding snacks in one hand and Sullen's big hand in the other. Her eyes were squinting like crescent moons. What is that? At this moment, a man not far away suddenly had a flash of inspiration in his eyes. He looked at the horse beside Su Len and a trace of surprise flashed across his face. He quickly ran up and stopped Su Len. "Sir, please wait a moment." Suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of Su Len and blocked his way. After seeing who it was, Sullen's eyebrows furrowed. He had seen this wizard before. It was the very high-profile Wizard Meister at the trade fair not long ago. Wizard Meister glanced at Su Len and turned his gaze towards the Pegasus behind Su Len. A flash of greed flashed in his eyes as he spoke to Su Len in an arrogant tone. "Is that your horse? It looks pretty good. I just happen to be lacking a fine horse. If you sell this horse to me, I can give you 10,000 kinner, or an equivalent magic item." Puh! When the Pegasus behind him heard his words, it snorted in dissatisfaction and even made a move to kick him. Su Len stroked the Pegasus' head to comfort it before turning to Meister with a calm expression. "This horse is my mount. I will not sell it." "Not sell?" After hearing Sullen's words, a cold light flashed in Meister's eyes. He then snorted coldly. "Do you know who I am? In the Doomsday Mountain Range, the Brandon family is the ruler. You only have two choices. Either you accept the friendship of the Brandon family, or you become the enemy of the Brandon family." A flash of murderous intent flashed in Sullen's eyes. Ever since he became a legendary, no one had dared to talk to him like this. Even the chief wizard of the Stellar Spire spoke to him as an equal. This was the first time he had been verbally threatened since he became a legend, and it was from a wizard who had yet to reach the legendary level. Although Meister had the backing of the Brandon family, and his father was the Sage of Fire, a legendary wizard, Meister was still not a legendary. It was a miracle that someone as arrogant as him could survive until now. Most legendary wizards like to stay at home. If Meister had offended a legendary wizard, he would have been killed on the spot. Even if his father, the Sage of Fire, came to find him, it would still be difficult. With the strength of a legendary wizard, it was hard to say who would win. After all, as a legendary wizard, who didn't have a few trump cards in their hands? Su Luen was very clear about how powerful a legendary wizard could be when he was prepared. Even if he didn't offend a legendary wizard, if he offended a rank 4 great wizard, he would be killed without hesitation. This was especially true for wizards who came from other regions. They could just run away as soon as they were done. The Sage of Fire wouldn't even be able to catch up with them. Meister's arrogance was completely the style of a spoiled brat. He had grown up in a greenhouse, and the Brandon family had protected him too well. He had never tasted the cruelty of society. Since everyone wanted to teach him a lesson, Su Len would take it upon himself to teach him a lesson about the evils of society. After glancing at Meister, Su Len didn't make a move. After all, this was the wizard market, and there was a wizard organization behind it. It wouldn't be good to smash the shop after buying something here. "I said, I'm not selling. As for the friendship of the Brandon family, how much is it for 500 grams? After saying that, Su Len didn't want to talk to a dead man. He turned around and left with the little girl and the Pegasus. Seeing that Su Len had ignored him, Meister's face turned green. His eyes were burning with anger. He raised his hand and was about to make a move, but he was stopped by a wizard beside him. "Meister, this is the wizard market. Behind this wizard market is the Lava Valley. If we make a move here, we won't be able to get away with it. When the time comes, we'll have to ask the family leader to come out." Meister's face turned even uglier. Although the Brandon family was powerful, the wizard organizations around them were not to be trifled with. Although the other wizard organizations didn't have legendary wizards, the Lava Valley did. If they made a move, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. The Lava Valley wouldn't give face to the Brandon family. After all, this would be destroying the reputation of the Lava Valley. The wizard beside him saw that Meister had calmed down and secretly let out a sigh of relief. Although Meister was arrogant, he wouldn't attack someone for no reason. What was going on today? What happened to you just now? That's a Pegasus, Meister said softly, suppressing his desire to make a move. Meister was born with a pair of spiritual eyes. He could see through many things, including the essence of some things. This was a mutation in his bloodline. Although Sullen's Pegasus was disguised and looked no different from an ordinary horse, Meister could see through it at a glance. Chapter 661. Pegasi and unicorns were heavenly creatures, and they were very similar. Pegasi had an extra pair of wings, while unicorns had an extra horn. The unicorn's horn and the blood of the Pegasus had a lot of divine effects. Although their strength was good, they were still hunted in large numbers. In fact, by the time of the Arcane Empire, these two creatures had rarely appeared in the material plane. In ancient times, because these two creatures had divinity, they were captured in large numbers. Later, these creatures left the material plane and followed the Master God of Order to Mountain Paradise, where they lived since then. Only a few lived in the Elven Forest. Of course, there was a very small chance of encountering them in other places. Yes, they were also the mounts of paladins. The female paladins' mounts were unicorns, while the male paladins' mounts were Pegasi. Of course, only a few paladins could gain their favor. Before the Arcane Empire, wizards generally extracted divinity from unicorns, divine spirits, indigenous demigods, and so on. The divinity carried by these divine creatures did not have so much negative consciousness. It was easy to absorb and not easy to be corrupted. But the problem was that divine creatures could not reproduce in large numbers like other creatures. Their numbers were limited. Later on, the number of divine creatures became fewer and fewer. Wizards then turned their attention to abominations, ancient evils, and demigod liches. The divinity in these monsters could be said to be a big problem. Although there were a lot of them, if they were not careful, they would be affected by the remnant will, and then be corrupted. Eventually, they would even become something similar to ancient evils. The moment Meister saw the Pegasi, he had made up his mind to take the Pegasi. Father is already a legendary wizard. It will be more difficult for him to continue to become stronger. If I can send the Pegasi this time, Father will be more powerful after extracting the divinity from it. The remaining materials of the Pegasi can be exchanged for some resources. Maybe it won't be long before I set foot in the realm of legends. Even if there is no chance for the time being, with Father, I will definitely advance into the realm of legends. By then, we will have 2 legends in our family. The entire Doomsday Mountains will be under our control. At the thought of this, Meister's heart was burning. He looked in the direction where Sulen left, and his eyes were even crazier. Meister was born with a pair of spiritual eyes. In addition to seeing through all kinds of illusions, he could see the origin of matter. This was not only useful in battle, but also in all kinds of magic experiments, especially in refining potions. With this pair of spiritual eyes, he could understand the essence of potions more accurately, so he could grasp the best time to perform the operation, and greatly increase the success rate when refining potions. Or when making magic items, the runes on the items would be better planned, and the various materials would fuse more perfectly. It could be said that having a pair of spirit eyes was very beneficial to a magus. So far, none of the adepts and apprentice adepts in Northern Town City possessed such a spirit eye. The wizard next to Meister was also surprised. He also knew the value of a Pegasus. After learning that Su Luan's horse was a Pegasus, his heart also became restless. Still, he frowned and whispered, "Meister, I saw that wizard not long ago at the trade fair. He just got a top-grade lava crystal, and he even used the blood of an ancient white dragon to exchange for it. I'm afraid he's not a pushover to be able to take out something so precious. Judging from that guy's aura and energy, he must be very powerful. We might not be able to defeat him. Should we go tell the family leader and let him deal with him personally? Father is in the middle of an important experiment, so he won't be able to come for a while. Also, this guy might leave soon. We need to do it as soon as possible. Don't worry about the 2 of us not being able to defeat him. I still have a few cards that Father gave me. One of them should be enough to deal with him," Meister said with a cold face. He was an arrogant person, and he would not allow anyone to go against his words. Su Luan's energy fluctuations were very strong, and he looked very young. This kind of wizard was basically not weak, and it was very likely that he had a powerful force behind him. If it was any other time, he wouldn't provoke this kind of person, but this time, the thing that appeared was too important. It was about the future of the family, and it was about the prosperity of the family. It was impossible to expect someone else to give it away. You had to fight for it yourself. Although the continent was not small, resources were limited. If you wanted more, then I would take less. If you wanted to grow stronger, then you had to fight for more resources. Why did all the major adept organizations have enemies? Apart from the difference in factions and the concept of right and wrong, the biggest reason was because of the various resources and benefits. As a descendant of a legendary wizard, Meister was usually very arrogant and domineering. He would not hesitate to fight for large amounts of resources. He did whatever he wanted, and it was very easy for him to offend people. Now that he saw a Pegasus, how could he hold back? That was almost impossible. That heavenly horse is something I must get. It's related to the prosperity of our Brandon family. My brother is proficient in tracking magic and has extraordinary strength. If we work together, we will definitely be able to successfully kill it. Please help me. After it's done, I will personally tell my father about it and give you more cultivation resources in the family. Meister said directly. All right. After a moment of silence, the wizard from the Brandon family agreed. But don't be impulsive. Give me some time to find out more about him. Then I'll leave it to you, brother. Meister finally smiled when he heard that the wizard had agreed to help. After being spoiled by a fly, Su Len did not continue to stroll around. He brought the little girl and the Pegasus back to the small courtyard he rented. In the next 2 days, Su Len bought some other things in the wizard market. Then, he left the wizard market with the little girl. As soon as he left the wizard bazaar, Su Luan directly opened the storage space and released several investigative eyes. In the past 2 days in the wizard bazaar, he found that someone had been following and observing him. Although that person's spells were very clever and his movements were very concealed, Su Luan still easily found him. Although his hiding ability was very strong, Su Len had the talent of the sixth sense. In addition, he was much stronger than the person who was following him. From the first time he was followed, Su Len found out. Chapter 662. As soon as Su Len left the wizard bazaar with the little girl, Meister was the first to receive the news. They're leaving so soon? How's the information gathering going? Meister asked with a frown. The wizard from the Brandon family said with a serious face. It's a little tricky. Time is tight, and the target is a stranger. He's not from the Doomsday Mountain Range, and he doesn't know anyone here. The information I can gather is limited. Humph. Meister snorted coldly. So what if we didn't get any information? Look at his skeletal age. He's not even 30 years old. How strong can a wizard this young be? At most, he's only a high-grade wizard. With the two of us, and the trump card that father gave us, even a grandmaster wizard wouldn't be a problem. Meister snorted coldly, then continued. Also, he brought a little girl with him. That little girl is just an ordinary person. How can she be a match for us? Let's go and get the Pegasus first. After Su Len released the Eye of Detection, it immediately entered the high-grade invisibility mode. The Eye of Detection was very small, and it was basically the size of a human's eye. In this kind of mountain range environment, it was even harder to detect. After releasing the Eye of Detection, Su Len didn't stop. He reached out and picked up the little girl, jumped on the horse, and galloped away. Less than 2 minutes after he left, 2 familiar figures appeared. Through the Eye of Detection, Su Len could clearly see all the movements of the 2 people behind them. They really dare to chase after me. Seeing the 2 figures that suddenly appeared in his mind, Su Len sneered in his heart. The image transmitted by the Eye of Detection was very clear, and it could directly see every movement of the target. It could be said that this was one of the best ways to monitor. Looks like I'll have to take care of them before I leave. A trace of killing intent flashed in Sullen's eyes. To those who dared to reach out their claws to him, Su Len wouldn't be polite. It's just 2 high-grade magi. Since you want to die, I'll send you on your way. With that thought in mind, Su Len lightly knocked on the horse's abdomen. The heaven horse jumped up and flew into the air. Then, it rushed towards the east. In fact, Su Len had originally planned to teleport directly, but with the little girl here, it would be very dangerous to do so. When the teleportation array broke through the void, the pressure was immense. Ordinary people's hands would not be able to withstand this pressure, and it would cause their blood vessels to rupture. Under normal circumstances, there would be special teleportation doors at both ends of the teleportation array. These teleportation doors would not only serve as coordinates, but also reduce the pressure of the teleportation array. With this kind of fixed teleportation array, even ordinary people could teleport without worrying about problems. In the Doomsday Mountain Range, in the west of the continent, Su Len did not make a rune transmission array at all, let alone a transmission door. If he wanted to take the little girl away, he could only ride the Pegasus back. It really is a heavenly horse. A hint of greed flashed in Meister's eyes. Not good, the Pegasus is very fast, we can't delay. Meister suddenly said. Hurry up and take out the flying carpets. Let's catch up to them. All right. The wizard from the Brandon family waved his hand and took out a carpet that was flashing with the light of magic. As soon as the carpet appeared, it opened up on its own and floated on the ground. The two of them sat on the magic carpet. The magic carpet flashed and immediately rose. After reaching a certain height, with a whoosh, it chased in the direction Su Len had just left. 4 crystals floated on the 4 corners of the magic carpet. With a flash of light, a protective shield rose from the crystals and blocked the cold wind outside. The flying magic carpet was very fast, much faster than the flying spells of high-grade wizards. This was not because of the flying carpet's speed. The flying carpet could change its speed according to the amount of energy that was injected. If more energy was injected, the speed of the flying carpet would increase. If less energy was injected, the speed of the flying carpet would decrease. Of course, the speed of the flying carpet could not be increased infinitely. After reaching a certain speed, no matter how much energy was injected, it would not increase its speed. This limit was close to the speed of sound. This was mainly due to the air resistance during flight. In their current position, in the atmosphere, it was very difficult for wizards to break through the sound barrier. Of course, it was not impossible to do so. For example, using anti-gravity spells and some other runes, one could break through the sound barrier in the main material world. However, the gains would not make up for the losses, and the cost would be too high. Using the flying carpet at close range was no problem at all. As for longer distances, of course, teleportation would be used. Teleportation could be easily traversed as long as one had the coordinates. Because of this, there were very few people in the material world who would study how to increase the speed of flight. The flying carpet's speed in the material world was close to the speed of sound. In the astral plane, without the suppression of the laws, the flying carpet could reach sublight speed. Of course, this method was meaningless. In the astral plane, a single teleportation could cross tens of millions of kilometers. Flying was basically on the verge of being eliminated. However, flying tools were still very popular in the material world, especially this type of flying carpet. It was comfortable and fast, and much better than the brooms used by some wizard organizations. Flying brooms were one of the less valuable flying tools. They were not very fast, and they had no protective barriers. The seats were also very simple. The only advantage they had was their low price. The flying carpet was very fast. Su Len could see the 2 people on the flying carpet cursing as they sped up. The Pegasus was very fast. It did not take long for them to leave the wizard market far behind. On the other hand, the speed of the magic carpet was also very fast. The Pegasus and the magic carpet were like 2 meteors streaking across the sky. However, in comparison, the speed of the magic carpet was still faster. Galloping a Pegasus also consumed physical strength, but in addition to using its own magic power, the magic carpet could also use energy crystals as a substitute. In order to catch up with Su Len, Meister had already used energy crystals as a substitute. The two were adjusting themselves to their best condition, waiting for the Pegasus to slow down. Although the Pegasus was very powerful as a divine creature, its own energy was also consumed. Naturally, it could not be compared to the energy crystals used by the flying carpet. Su Len did not plan to use the Pegasus to escape. He just wanted to lure the two to a suitable place. The Pegasus had been bored for a long time and wanted to run. Soon, the Pegasus would be tired, and it would be time for the two to die. Chapter 663. The 2 groups of people continued to fly in the sky, one in front and one behind. They were like 2 meteors that streaked across the sky. Su Len flew for thousands of kilometers until he reached the Sunset Mountains. He then patted the Pegasus to stop. Hush! After running to its heart's content, the Pegasus snorted happily and shook its head before stopping in mid-air. Su Len patted the little girl's head. Ride the Pegasus and don't move. I'll come back after I've dealt with the two guys behind us. The Pegasus will protect you. Uncle, when will you be back? The little girl asked reluctantly. I'll be back soon. Don't worry. Su Len smiled and pinched the little girl's cheek. He then let the Pegasus run into the forest below and hide with the little girl. As soon as he was done, the two people behind him caught up. When they saw Su Len, they laughed maniacally. Kid, you can't run anymore, right? Hand over the Pegasus. If I'm in a good mood, I might even let you. Boom! Before Meister could finish his words, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky. The lightning was so fast that it appeared in front of them before they could react. Watch out! The other wizard's expression changed. He immediately activated the defensive runic array on the flying magic carpet. An energy barrier appeared in front of them and blocked the lightning. However, the power of the lightning was beyond their imagination. The barrier, which could withstand the full power of a seventh circle spell, shattered like glass under the attack of the lightning. Meister and the other wizards' expressions changed. The seventh circle defensive spell was broken directly. This person's strength was obviously beyond their expectations. You're a fourth-tier great wizard. Meister shouted loudly. Why are you shouting so loudly? Are you looking for help? This is a place with good feng shui that I specially selected for you. You don't have to thank me. Su Luan smiled. Your magic carpet is not bad, but it'll be mine soon. Humph, you're shameless. Go to hell. A ferocious glint flashed across Meister's eyes as he took out a magic scroll and activated it. The surface of the magic scroll had a dark golden brilliance, and the mana fluctuations on it were very astonishing. There was at least an 8th level spell sealed inside. Raging Firestorm. The dazzling light of the spell flashed and shrouded Su Len. Su Len frowned slightly. Then, a ray of light rose and blocked the spell. The raging flame storm was indeed powerful. The endless flames were like a rain of fire, forming a flaming tornado that fell from the sky. However, after touching the elemental barrier in front of Su Len, they all dissipated. How can a great wizard be so powerful? This is the trump card my father gave me. It contains a strand of his consciousness. Even a tier 4 great mage won't be able to stop it, unless he's a mythic. A hint of surprise flashed across Meister's ferocious face. Then, his expression changed drastically. He didn't have time to say anything. He immediately took out another magic scroll that wasn't inferior to the previous one and was about to activate it. However, just as he took out the magic scroll, his body suddenly froze. Trying to run? Did you ask for my permission? A cold voice sounded in his ear. Then, he saw a hand reach out and easily take the magic scroll in his hand. A teleportation scroll? You're quite generous. Su Len took the magic scroll and examined it. It was a teleportation scroll. Once activated, it could teleport the user to a distance of 2,000 kilometers. The craftsmanship of this magic scroll was very good. Moreover, the runic circle was engraved with a spell that could resist the dimensional anchor. If the person who cast the dimensional anchor was not a legendary, the teleportation spell would not be interrupted. It could be said that this was one of the trump cards used to escape. However, before Meister could use it, Su Len had directly used the human immobilization spell to control him. This magic scroll became his spoils of war. Not bad. I'll take it as payment for burying it. Su Len directly put the magic scroll into his pocket. A magic scroll like this could be sold for at least 300,000 kinnar in the wizard market, or even more. Alright, we've wasted a lot of time. It's time to end this. Su Len clapped his hands. Then, a bright flash of lightning fell from the sky. The ferocious look on Meister's face had long since disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by fear. He struggled desperately to break free from the spell, but it was destined to be futile. Soon, his consciousness fell into darkness, and he was completely submerged by the endless thunder and lightning. When the lightning dissipated, the place where the two wizards originally stood was empty. Only a pile of gray powder was left. A gentle breeze blew, and everything disappeared without a trace. This lightning is so convenient. It's even better than cremation. What's this called? Did you scatter the ashes? Su Len clapped his hands. Good control of the force. The 2 portal bags are not damaged. Su Len then waved his hand and took the flying magic carpet and the 2 portal bags. After a simple inspection, the flying magic carpet was a little damaged. When he broke the magic carpet's protective barrier, the protective crystal on the magic carpet broke. However, it was not a big problem. Without the protective crystal, the magic carpet could still fly. It was just that the wind when it flew was a little strong. It felt like a level 14 storm. Su Len planned to take the magic carpet back and repair it. This thing was much more useful than the flying spell. Su Len looked at the material of the magic carpet. It should be a rune cloth. This kind of rune cloth was woven with special silk threads according to a certain method. Some special magic materials were mixed into it. The rune cloth was strong and beautiful. It also had good magical properties. It was usually used as a material for magic robes. Of course, this kind of rune cloth was also divided into different grades. It was different from the rune cloth used to make robes for wizard apprentices and low-level wizards. This rune cloth in front of him should be a high-grade material. After a simple inspection, Su Len put away the magic carpet. He then took the portal bags of the 2 wizards. With a flash of light in his hand, the defensive measures on the portal bags were directly broken. He poured out everything in the portal bags and began to search. In order to prevent any tracking methods, he needed to check everything. This kid is rich. Looking at the dazzling array of potions, enchanted materials, magic gems, scrolls, and so on, Sullen's eyes lit up. He quickly organized everything. Chapter 664. 63 pieces of high-quality magic gems, 21 bottles of various magic potions, and more than 300 pieces of magic crystals and energy crystals. For magic scrolls, 1 for escaping, 1 for banishing, and 2 for attacking. Kiske, so rich. Su Len looked at the pile of items in front of him. The value of these things added up to at least 2 million kinner. Killing and arson was indeed a golden belt. Su Len threw away the space bag with satisfaction, then put all the items into the storage space. Next, he opened another space bag. However, there were much fewer things in the space bag, far less than the previous one. But this was normal. After all, the guy just now should have a good background, so it was normal for him to have more good things and be richer. Soon, the 2 storage bags were completely cleaned. Su Len threw away all the daily necessities of the 2 people. These things were the best medium for prophecy spells. Although he was not afraid of the so-called Sage of Fire, he did not want to delay any longer. He had been away from home for more than 3 months, and he wanted to go home. He cleaned up the place skillfully. His technique was quite professional. Su Len left. Soon, he found the Pegasus and the little girl eating fruits in the forest. Then he reached out and patted them on the head. Well, I was busy there, and you 2 were eating secretly. Ah, uncle, you're back. Seeing that it was Su Len, the little girl immediately pounced on him. Hey, don't come over. Seeing the little girl nibbling on the purple wild fruit and pouncing on him, the purple juice directly dyed his clothes into pieces. Little girl, look at what you've done. Su Len reached out and tapped Vinia's head a few times. His originally white linen robe was covered in white and purple patches, and it was impossible to tell what it looked like before. Hee. The little girl raised her face and smiled at Su Len, her face still stained with purple juice. Su Len threatened her with a look of disgust. Go and wash yourself clean, or I'll leave you here. As soon as she heard that they were leaving, the little girl quickly stuffed the fruit into her mouth. Her face was stuffed like a fat hamster. Then, she pulled up her sleeve and wiped her mouth back and forth a few times. She looked at Su Len, obviously saying that she had recovered. Su Len didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the little girl. He helplessly shook his head and snapped his fingers. With a flash of light, he activated the cleanse spell and cleaned the little girl's body. Reaching out, Su Len lifted the little girl up and placed her on the back of the Pegasus. Then, he mounted the Pegasus and left the Sunset Mountain range, quickly flying towards the east. Just one day after he left, a figure quickly appeared in this area. This person rummaged around for a long time and finally found all the things that Su Luen had discarded. Damn it! He's too far away. I can't track him anymore. The middle-aged man in a fiery red robe said with an ugly expression. Who killed my son? I must find you and burn you to ashes. Now that all the clues are gone, we can only find that old witch if we want to find the murderer. Damn it! The middle-aged wizard said with gritted teeth. Then, he took the things he found and left the forest. These people from the School of Prophecy are all vampires. I hope she doesn't disappoint me. As he said that, a flash of light flashed on the middle-aged wizard's body, and he flew in another direction. Su-Len didn't know what happened after that, but even if he knew, he wouldn't care. If a legendary wizard wanted to die, Su-Len wouldn't mind spending some time to bury him. As for the wizard from the School of Prophecy, Su-Len wasn't worried at all. Prophecy was powerful, but it wasn't omnipotent. Hathaway was also a witch from the School of Prophecy, and Su-Len had a deep understanding of the School of Prophecy. He was worried that his origin would be discovered, but the system on his body had hidden him, so prophecy spells were useless against him. Other than the system's shield, Su-Len also used his own power to add a layer of camouflage to himself. With his current strength, let alone a legendary wizard, she couldn't even break through Sullen's shield. More importantly, casting prophecy spells on Su-Len would backfire. If it was a normal prophecy spell, the backfire wouldn't be too strong. However, if it was a powerful prophecy spell, it would be very troublesome. Su-Len didn't care about these things. Su-Len took the little girl all the way through the Sunset Mountains, around the Swamp of Despair, and through the Sea of Death. After flying for tens of thousands of kilometers, they finally returned to the northern wasteland. They were basically home now. It took them more than a month to get there, but it only took them 5 days to get back. When they returned to the northern city, it had become even more prosperous after a few months. The inner city had become a large construction site. A large number of workers and golems were remodeling the northern city. The ground was dug up again, and magic crystals were installed. These were the energy channels of the floating city. Su-Len didn't stop. He went straight to the North Wind Tower and saw Hathaway on the astrology platform. Su-Len smiled. I've gained a lot from my trip to the western end of the continent. Hathaway immediately saw the little girl behind Su-Len, including this little girl. Is she your daughter? Su-Len was speechless. My daughter? My daughter isn't even born yet. I met her at the Wizard Fair. She has no family, so I brought her back. She has no family at such a young age. How pitiful. Hessian looked at her without pity. Then from today onwards, we are your family. All right, I've found the lava crystal you wanted. Seeing that the two were about to start chatting, Su-Len quickly took out a fiery red crystal. As soon as the crystal appeared, the whole room became a little hot. The red crystal looked like a flame that had not been extinguished. A high-quality lava crystal. Su-Len took out the lava crystal, and Hathaway immediately took it. After a simple examination, Hathaway said with satisfaction, the purity is very high. This is already the highest quality. It should be enough to make an elemental fusion furnace. Hathaway said with a smile. Then I'll leave the rest to you. Su-Len said. All right, her name is Vania. She's a 5th grade talent like you. You can hand it to her yourself. 5th grade talent. Hessian's eyes lit up as he stared at the little girl. Such a good talent. Then learn from me. I will teach her to become a legendary wizard. Chapter 665. After Hathaway became a legendary wizard, the speed of her strength improvement slowed down. This was not because Hathaway did not work hard, but because Hathaway's inheritance of the Northern Witches had come to an end. The Northern Witches may have once been glorious, but in the past 1,000 years, the Northern Witches had been declining as a school of sorcerers. So their inheritance was now only at the legendary level. At present, the main inheritance of the Northern Witches was the divination school and the fire system. These two schools had complete inheritance and could be practiced all the way to the legendary level. Other schools, such as the water system, the ice system, and the spell system only had the level of high-grade wizards, and some inheritances were even only up to the intermediate wizard level. The difference between having inheritance and not having inheritance was still very big. Why did Hathaway's strength improve so quickly? The reason was simple. In addition to a lot of resources provided by Su-Len, Hathaway's School of Cultivation had various notes and materials left behind by the predecessors. It was like a person learning the knowledge in the textbook, and there were also various classroom notes, 5 years of college entrance examination, 3 years of simulation, and many other materials to assist. Of course, the progress was faster. But these materials were all at the legendary level. After entering the legendary level, Hathaway had no follow-up practice methods. So from now on, she needed to create her own practice methods and then improve. The consequence was that the speed of advancement would slow down, but once she succeeded, this method was more powerful than following the footsteps of the predecessors. Along the way, as long as she succeeded, Hathaway would become a master of the generation. In the era of the Arcane Empire, she had the opportunity to become a great arcanist. The title of Great Arcanist was not just about strength. Strength was only one of the basic requirements. They were all the top masters who had created their own schools. Otherwise, those gods would not have been so afraid of these great arcanists. According to the level evaluation of the era of the Arcane Empire, the legendary was level 21, the high-grade legendary was level 26, and the great arcanist was level 45. At this level it was already the realm of the gods. In addition to Hathaway's divination school, the fire system of cultivation school, and Sullen's thunder system, the school of cultivation of the wind element had recently been added. This wind element was added by Alex. As the Harpy Queen, the current queen of the winged people, Alex had a very thin bloodline of the ancient wind god. After integrating divinity, she had a deeper understanding of the rules of the wind element, and then she used her own strength to reverse deduce a wind element cultivation method. Of course, this method of cultivation was only at the legendary level, and the road after that needed Alex to explore. Sullen's current wizard level was actually far behind his own strength. He was now similar to Alex, using the power of divinity and the control of the law of lightning to reverse deduce. It was not so easy to reverse deduce a cultivation method. It required a lot of knowledge as a foundation. Since becoming a legendary, Sulen began to use all kinds of channels to collect knowledge. He either bought it from some wizards with inheritances or communicated with other wizard schools to deepen the foundation of the North Wind Tower. Fortunately, Sulen obtained a lot of wizard knowledge from the treasure chest. Through this knowledge, Sulen and the others continued to grow. Now, Hathaway and the others' strength could be said to be not weak among the legendary wizards. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was winter again. It was also on this day that the first batch of wizard apprentices in the North Wind Academy began to become rank 1 wizards. After becoming a rank 1 wizard, the previous contract they signed with the North Wind Academy would automatically become invalid. Next, these low-grade wizards would sign a new contract with the North Wind Academy. This kind of contract would be more relaxed, which also marked the beginning of the rise of the North Wind Academy. After all, in the past, the strength of the North Wind Academy depended on a few high-grade wizards. Now, the middle and low-grade wizards were slowly making up for it. While the North Wind Academy was growing stronger, the North Wind Duchy was also growing stronger. Ever since Sulen established the North Wind Duchy in the northern wastelands, the duchy had been constantly expanding. After a few years of development, the population of the North Wind Duchy had reached 600,000 before winter. The fastest developing city was Deepwater City. It had to be said that the sea trade had an amazing effect on the prosperity of a city. In just a year, the city had a population of around 100,000. Although the population of Deepwater City was growing fast, it was not as crazy as it was now. This situation was caused by Sulen leading the fleet to fight against the pirates. One had to know that merchants and pirates were natural enemies. The North Wind Tower fought against the pirates, which made the sea route prosperous at an amazing speed. Of course, most of the people in the city were sailors. The second most populous city in the North Wind Duchy was Mirror Lake City, which was south of Northtown City. Through continuous immigration, the population had reached 140,000. Mirror Lake City's climate was warmer, and there was a large mirror lake near the city with abundant water. Its future potential was no less than Northtown City's. The city with the lowest population in the North Wind Duchy was the New City. It was just built this year and only had a population of 80,000. After Sullen's fight against the pirates, more and more merchants came to Deepwater City to trade. At first, the merchants thought that the sea route was safe, but after coming here, they realized that the goods produced by Deepwater City were white sugar, paper, alcohol, weapons, and other goods in high demand. Deepwater City suddenly became very popular. Whether it was white sugar, paper, or alcohol, they were all very popular in other places. If it wasn't for Sullen's special restrictions, the merchants who came here would have packed up all the white sugar, paper, and alcohol. The weapons produced by the dwarves were also very popular. One had to know that the world had never been truly peaceful. Every year, There would be wars in various parts of the continent. Excellent weapons were never enough. North Town City had a large number of grey dwarves. They provided many excellent weapons, which brought a considerable amount of income to North Town City. After Deepwater City's port was opened, the demand for all kinds of goods in North Town City increased. So far, the production of white sugar in North Town City was 8 times higher than last year. Even so, the supply still couldn't meet the demand. The demand for alcohol and paper had also increased by several times. It should be known that the Deepwater port had only been open for half a year. According to the current growth rate, the demand for next year would increase by at least 3 to 5 times. Chapter 666. With such a huge demand, the North Town City naturally had to produce at full capacity. Fortunately, Su Luan had been developing agriculture in the northern wastelands for the past few years. The entire North Wind Principality had already cultivated more than 1 million mu of farmland. Of course, this number was not much compared to the farmland of other countries. It was much lower. According to the population, there were 600,000 people and 1 million mu of farmland. On average, each person would get less than 2 mu of farmland. In his previous life, a few mu of farmland would be enough to feed a family. However, this was the Middle Ages where technology was backward. Normally, even with a high-yield crop like potatoes, a family would need at least 30 mu of farmland. If all kinds of taxes were taken into account, this number would increase by 50 mu. After all, potatoes were not expensive. If one wanted to make money, they had to grow wheat and oats. Moreover, the feudal lords only collected a small part of the taxes. Most of the farmers in this world grew potatoes for their own consumption. Most of them grew wheat, barley, oats, and other crops. The yield of these 3 crops was not high. The reason why Northern Town could grow so many crops was because of the high yield per mu. The land in the northern wastelands was already quite fertile. With the addition of the harvest altar, the yield of wheat in Northern Town could reach 600 caddies per mu. Although there was a huge difference between the yield of 600 caddies per mu and the yield of 1,000 caddies per mu in his previous life, the wheat in his previous life had undergone professional breeding and the use of various fertilizers to reach 1,000 caddies per mu. There were no fertilizers in this world. Under normal circumstances, the yield of farmland in the southern provinces was around 300 caddies per mu. In the north, it was around 250 caddies per mu. Many barren lands only had 200 caddies per mu. The fact that Northern Town's farmland could reach 600 caddies per mu was already a miracle in this era. The main reason for this was the harvest altar. Apart from the harvest altar, Su Len also built a fertilizer factory. The manure produced in Northern Town would be collected and transported to the fertilizer factory to be fermented. After fermentation, it would be sent to the farmland. Although the fertilizer was not as good as the fertilizers, it was better than no fertilizers. With the help of the fertilizer and the harvest altar, Northern Town also planted a lot of cash crops in addition to food. Among them, the planting area of beets was the highest. After all, the demand for white sugar was too high. Moreover, the residue left after the sugar extraction of beets was not useless. These beet residue were also good fodder. At the same time, the sweet tea dregs were mixed with wheat bran, soybean dregs, and soybean dregs from extracting soybean oil. This was a very good feed. Centaur City currently had a total of several 100,000 horses, cows, and sheep, so the demand for feed was very high. The best horses would be used as war horses for Northern Town City, and the second best horses would be sold to other countries. However, even the second best horses were still good war horses. Normally, these war horses would be used by heavy cavalry. The second best horses would also be sold as war horses, and these horses would be used as normal war horses. The rest of the horses were used as draft horses or pack horses. North Town City also had horse plowing in addition to cattle plowing. Some of the other cows were used for plowing, while the rest were slaughtered as beef to supply the Duchy of North Wind. Because of the prosperity of the trade, North Town City consumed a lot of beef every day. Cowhide was also a good material. It could be used to make leather armor or other leather products. Cow tendons were also collected to make all kinds of bowstrings. It could be said that the value of a cow had been excavated to the limit. There was no need to talk about sheep. The north was cold, so sheepskin was an important tool for the commoners to resist the cold. Su Len even wanted to develop a wool textile industry, but Su Len didn't know anything about wool weaving, so he could only leave it to the gnomes who had experience in weaving. A large number of cows and sheep enriched the Duchy of North Wind's meat. At the same time, the manure produced by these cows and sheep was sent to the farm fertilizer factory to be fermented. It could be said that North Wind Duchy had formed a good ecological chain. After a few years of development, North Wind Duchy had become very rich in food. However, in order to continue to expand the sea trade, North Wind Duchy's various grain crops had to continue to expand. The planting area of beets was actually not enough. During this time, the amount of white sugar had increased several times. A part of it was from North Town City's inventory, while the other part was the real production. Therefore, when planting beets this year, North Town City once again expanded the planting area of beets. In the next few years, the planting area of beets would continue to expand. In addition to white sugar, North Town City's production of alcohol and white paper would continue to expand. Alcohol was a little simpler because rum was made from the leftover caramel from the production of white sugar. As the production of white sugar increased, the production of rum would also increase. As for vodka, this kind of liquor was not very popular in the south, but it was very popular in the north. Now, in addition to these two kinds of alcohol, North Town City had also started to brew iced wine, barley beer, and other drinks. However, the production of these drinks was still low. Paper was popular among the nobles. In order to produce paper, Su Len cut down a large number of trees near Mirror Lake City. At the same time, he was preparing to plant bamboo. Because bamboo grew quickly and had a lot of fiber, it was far more suitable for paper than plants. Su Len planned to plant a large number of bamboo to use as the raw material for paper. To Su Luan's surprise, he originally thought that the most popular paper should be various kinds of writing paper, but to his great surprise, the sales of writing paper could be said to be very poor. On the other hand, the sales of toilet paper, which he did not think highly of, continued to rise. It was simply unexpected. For this matter, Su Len purposely asked the merchants who bought paper. According to them, the preservation time of words written on paper was short, it was easy to damage, and it was not as strong as parchment. As for Su Len's claim that the paper was cheap, the same weight of paper could record more words, and it was more beneficial for the spread of knowledge. However, this claim was ridiculed by the merchants. According to the merchants, the nobles did not want more people to have knowledge. It was best for knowledge to be in the hands of people like them. Therefore, after seeing the advantages of paper, they ignored it. These aristocrats were just like the aristocratic families in ancient China in his previous life. They wanted to monopolize knowledge. After learning the reason for the unpopularity of writing paper, Su Luan was helpless. On the contrary, the popularity of toilet paper was the opposite. In the past, the nobles who used ropes, sticks, leaves, and other items decisively threw them away after trying toilet paper. Su Len did not know whether to laugh or cry. Paper-making did not bring about the spread of knowledge. Instead, it started a toilet revolution. Chapter 667. Although the nobles refused to use paper to write in order to prevent knowledge from being spread on a large scale, this method was only temporary. As paper spread more and more widely, more and more areas used this paper, and eventually some people would use paper to write. After all, not all scholars were nobles. For merchants, the emergence of paper brought them great convenience. These merchants would not refuse to use paper to control the flow of knowledge like the nobles. They were more concerned about profits. As long as the price of parchment books remained high, there would be merchants who would use paper to copy and sell it at a slightly lower price. Don't think that these merchants would not dare. As long as there was enough profit, there was nothing that merchants would not sell. As long as there was money, they would even sell the ropes used to hang them. Not to mention books. The nobles' idea of blocking knowledge would only last for a while. Then, they would find that the number of paper books on the market had become a disaster. How high was the cost of making a parchment book? In this era, parchment was made from lambskin. A complete parchment was a small lamb. It was not easy to make a parchment. Not all kinds of lambskin could be made into parchment. Craftsmen would choose lambs of suitable age to make parchment. Generally, lambs were 2 to 3 years old. At the same time, they would observe the color of their fur. From experience, they knew that if the fur was pure white, the parchment would also be pure white. And if one wanted to make paper with a pleasing dark pattern, one would have to choose fur with stripes. In order to ensure the perfection of the paper, they also had to carefully check whether there were scars left by diseases or parasites. Generally speaking, only 1 out of 5 pieces of sheepskin would be suitable. To make parchment, the first step was to soak the parchment in clean water. At the same time, the hair on the parchment had to be removed. Lime powder and other things needed to be added. This process usually took 3 to 10 days. After washing, the parchment had to be stretched on a wooden board. At the same time, the hair on the parchment had to be shaved with a knife. After a series of steps, the parchment was considered complete. The price of such a piece of parchment was at least 1 kinner. A book made entirely of parchment could cost up to 100 kinner. Moreover, such parchment books were thick and heavy, but they did not record as much content as paper books. It was only a matter of time before they were replaced by paper. But so far, no businessman had done that. Perhaps someone had already done it secretly, but Su Len didn't know about it yet. Most of the activities in the Northwind Principality had come to a halt during the winter. The snowstorm in the northern wastelands was very cold. Traveling through the wastelands at this time was basically suicide. The hungry monsters in the wastelands were on the verge of going crazy from hunger. They were more dangerous than ever. During this period of time, the Northwind Principality's trade was basically suspended. Every year, there would be about 2 months of snow and wind. Therefore, during the winter, the Beifeng Duchy would cancel most outdoor work during this period of time. The people who didn't need to work would either go to the taverns to drink, go to the training grounds, or stay at home to make babies. Therefore, every winter in Beifeng Principality was an opportunity for its population to explode. Under normal circumstances, around August next year, the Northwind Principality would usher in a baby boom. Although the snowstorm had interrupted the Northwind Principality's trade for 2 months, and although it had lost a lot of income, it had also gained an opportunity for population growth. However, during this winter, although the other cities in the Northwind Principality had cancelled outdoor work, the Northtown City did not. The design of the floating city had been completed, and all kinds of renovation work were being carried out in an orderly manner. Therefore, the renovation work in the inner city of the Northtown City was not interrupted. Although the Northtown City was in the north, under the effect of the harvest altar, the city wasn't very cold. The renovation work could continue. In the inner city of the Northtown City, after a few months, the various factories that were originally in the inner city had all been moved out. For these factories, Su Len deliberately isolated an area in the outer city, where all the factories were located. The palace, which originally occupied the largest area in Su Len, had also been moved to the outer city. The floating city's area was limited, so Su Len had decided to live in the Northwind Tower. The land that was saved would be used to build other buildings. The first phase of the renovation of the floating city was progressing smoothly. The first phase of the renovation was more focused on the underground. Here, the underground network of the floating city would be laid out. The energy of the elemental furnace could enter all parts of the floating city through the underground network. By then, it would basically become a magic city. In the Northtown City, there were actually a lot of very good magic props, but it was still at the level of medieval civilization. For example, the magic lamp, which had been widely used as early as the era of the Arcane Empire. But until now, the magic lamp was only used inside the major wizard organizations and wizard towers. In addition to the price, there was also the energy needed for the magic lamp. Compared with the electricity in his previous life, the magic energy in this world was more violent and more difficult to control. In addition, stable and continuous energy was not easy to obtain. However, with the elemental furnace, the energy problem of the Northtown City was temporarily solved. After laying out the underground network, Su Len could even build rows of street lamps in the inner city. In his blueprint, the inner city of the elemental pool was more advanced than in his previous life. After all, many times, magic could do things that couldn't be done by technology in his previous life. Magic energy couldn't be used without restraint. Detailed planning must be done before use. No flaws were allowed in the underground network. It was a very large project. Su Len and Hathaway did a cost calculation. It would cost about 10 to 20 million kinner to complete it. Fortunately, Su Len had been making money in various ways. He had obtained hundreds of millions of kinnar from the southern pirates, and this time, he had made a lot of money in the west of the continent. All of these together were basically enough to cover the cost of the first phase of the floating city. The second phase of the project required the income of the Northtown City. The income of the Northtown City was now very high. In addition to the various production in the underground world and the production of the secret realm, As well as some extra income that Su Len got from time to time, the second phase of the project was estimated to be enough. Transforming the floating city didn't require all the money at once. It was continuous, so the pressure on resources was not so tight. The second phase of the project would build a complete ecological balance system and the living system of the floating city. Chapter 668. North Wind Tower. Astrology Platform. Su Len had been studying legendary spells all this time. The last time the North Wind Tower traded with the Stellar Tower, in addition to obtaining some legendary grade knowledge, they also obtained several legendary grade spells. The spells he was studying now were Sword of Annihilation, Time Stop, Chain of Accidents, Mage's Disjunction, Imprison, and so on. Some of these spells were exchanged, and some were inherited from Hathaway and the others. The number was not small. Legendary spells were difficult to learn. Even Su Len had no way to master them quickly, unless he was willing to spend legendary skill points to learn them. With just one legendary skill point, he could master a legendary spell quickly. The flying magic carpet brought back by Su Len was very popular, second only to the magic pearls he took out. As soon as the flying magic carpet was taken out, it was confiscated by Hathaway. She was going to analyze the flying magic carpet and then recreate it. The flying magic carpet was still very popular. It was faster than flying and more flexible than floating ships. It could carry up to 6 people and was very suitable for transportation. It could also be sold to make money. It could be said that as Su Len grew stronger, he needed more money. Wizards were too good at spending money. Not to mention the usual various experiments, the money spent on them was already an unimaginable number for ordinary people. Let's talk about the floating city. It was no exaggeration to say that the entire floating city was piled up with money. Most adepts spent money faster than they could earn money. The floating city project was basically equivalent to a country building a space station in his previous life. It was very difficult for a country, and the difficulty of building a floating city was equivalent to interstellar colonization. All kinds of research, all kinds of materials, and the speed of burning money was simply too fast. Hathaway basically spent tens of thousands of kinnar to conduct an experiment. In a month, at least 6 experiments of this scale would need to be done. If it were not for the materials produced in the secret realm, North Town would have been worn out. More than 70% of these experiments yielded no results, but you had to do it. It was basically burning money. This was also because Su Len was good at making money. Ordinary people really couldn't handle this prodigal woman. If it was just an experiment, it would be fine. If there were no results, it would just continue to burn money. However, once there was a breakthrough, the speed of burning money would increase exponentially. The Kinnar was like the Red Sand River outside Northtown town. The river water was converted into gold coins, which flowed out. At this time, Su Len did not even dare to ask. His heart ached too much. Of course, there was someone who felt even more heartache than Su Len. It was the Red Dragon Onyx Vaya. It could be said that she suffered even more than Su Len. Before she went to sleep, she checked that the treasury was full of gold. When she woke up, she suddenly realized that it was so spacious. My huge mountain of gold is gone with a whoosh? It wasn't difficult to make a magic carpet. Compared to the floating space tower and the floating space city, it was only slightly more difficult. So, after some research, Hathaway quickly made a new magic carpet. Then it got out of hand. From Chris to Phyllis, including Sandy, Angela, and Anna, everyone had a magic carpet. This directly led to the frequent appearance of magic carpets in the sky of Northtown town during this period of time. Not only did Hathaway make a new magic carpet, but she also made some improvements to the magic carpet, which made it faster and more stable when flying. At the same time, the protective spells on the magic carpet were stronger, and the energy consumption was not much increased. The cost of such a magic carpet was 80,000 kinnar. The North Wind Tower was selling it at 300,000 kinnar, which was the normal price of a magic carpet. It had to be said that the wizards were really ruthless. In addition to the magic carpet, Hathaway had another product, which was the floating spaceship. While studying the production of the magic carpet, Hathaway also studied the floating spaceship. To be honest, after the floating space tower was built, the floating spaceship was basically not difficult to make. The most important thing on the floating spaceship was the floating space ring. In addition to the floating space ring, there was the energy system and the protective system. The energy system of the floating spaceship was a bit troublesome. After all, it was not like the floating space tower, which could build an elemental pool. As for building an elemental pool in the floating spaceship, not to mention other things, the cost alone was very high. A miniaturized elemental pool would cost at least 200,000 kinner to barely make it. In addition to some other materials, the cost of a floating spaceship would be at least 800,000 kinner, and the price would be even higher. Such an expensive price was not suitable to be used as a tool of trade. However, when studying the magic carpet, Hathaway prepared another plan, which was to use energy crystals to drive it. At the same time, she also built an energy-gathering rune array on the floating spaceship, which could gather the elemental energy in the air into the floating space tower. After doing so, the floating spaceship's endurance would be reduced. However, the advantage was that the transportation cost would be reduced. From Sullen's point of view, the floating spaceship was not very cost-effective for transportation. However, as soon as the floating spaceship appeared, many businessmen saw a business opportunity and bought it at a high price. After completing the research on the floating spaceship and the flying magic carpet, Hathaway no longer cared about these things. Instead, she continued to study the elemental fusion furnace. The elemental fusion furnace was very dangerous, and she had to be careful. Once there was any problem, it would cause very serious consequences. If this thing were to accidentally explode, the entire Northtown city would be reduced to nothing. The function of the lava crystal that Su Len brought back this time was to make the elemental fusion furnace more resistant and sturdier. The principal experiment of the elemental fusion furnace had been completed long ago, and the technical difficulties were almost solved after Hathaway's research. After Su Len prepared all kinds of raw materials, the construction of the elemental fusion furnace began officially. The elemental fusion furnace was the core of the entire floating space city. Only with the elemental fusion furnace, the floating space city could fly. Of course, if you found the mice energy core that had been passed down from the Arcane Empire, you could fly without building an elemental fusion furnace. Moreover, the mice energy core had another advantage, which was that it did not consume fuel. The mice energy core could directly extract a steady stream of energy, which was more useful than the elemental fusion furnace. Only the elemental annihilation furnace could be slightly better. Chapter 669. As the ice and snow melted, the northern wasteland became lively again. The caravans that had endured the winter began to prepare for departure as soon as the ice and snow melted. Although the weather was still a little cold at this time, the road from the northern provinces to the northern wasteland would become muddy and very difficult to walk on once the ice and snow completely melted. Therefore, the experienced caravans would set off a little earlier. After entering the Beifeng Principality, the road was completely different. The Beifeng Principality had a special interest in road construction. They connected all the cities in the Beifeng Principality with stone roads. According to them, these were official roads. The official roads in the Beifeng Principality were very extravagant. In Old Han's opinion, this was completely a waste of money. The average width of the official roads in the Beifeng Principality was 6 meters, which could easily accommodate 4 carriages side by side. This was something that the roads in many cities in other countries on the continent could not compare to. As the ice and snow melted, the migration to the Beifeng Principality began again. According to Sullen's idea, the Beifeng Principality needed at least 1 million people in a short period of time. In order to develop the northern wasteland, they needed at least 10 to 20 million people. This was a long-term mission that could last for decades. In addition to the migration in the northern wasteland, the Deepwater City also opened up a migration route. Due to the warm climate, developed commerce, relatively stable society, and high food production, the countries in the southern seas developed very quickly. At the same time, the population of these countries also increased rapidly. However, the good natural conditions and environment did not only bring benefits. The world's productivity was only around the medieval era. There were no large-scale factories, so it was impossible to absorb too many people. The amount of land was also very limited. The nobles would not spend more money to hire more farmers. As a result, these countries had a large number of idle people. In order to survive, many people chose to become sailors or pirates. After all, the navigation technology of this era was very dangerous every time they went out to sea. But even so, there were still a large number of people that could not be settled. These people also became a hidden danger to the stability of the cities. After Su Len discovered this, he ordered Deepwater City to plan the migration in those places. Anyone who was willing to immigrate to the Beifeng Principality would be given 10 mu of farmland as long as they worked for the Beifeng Principality for 3 years. In addition to the 10 mu of farmland, the government would build a house for them and they would also have the right to open up 50 mu of farmland. The farmland obtained from the open-up land would be exempt from taxes for 3 years, and only half of the taxes would be collected for 5 years. As for why Su Len didn't offer better terms, it was because the terms he offered were too good. No one would believe him. They would only think that he was a liar. He said that as long as you let him go, he would give you 50 mu of land, a house and tax exemption. Then they would board the ship, leave the port and sell these people as slaves. This kind of thing had happened many times before. Being on a ship was different from being on land. Once you were on a ship, you had to listen to what others said. In the past, many slave traders used this kind of deceit to make a fortune. In the beginning, when Deepwater City's immigrant ships came to the Southern Sea to recruit immigrants, they offered very good conditions. However, very few people came to sign up, and many people didn't even come after signing up. After seeing this situation, Deepwater City's immigration officials were confused. They even raised the immigration conditions again, but in the end, fewer people came. The immigration officials who didn't understand the situation finally found some people who were familiar with the situation to act as consultants. With the help of these people, they lowered the immigration standards and successfully carried out the immigration. Now, Deepwater City's immigration officials went one step further. They were now cooperating with the nobles of the Southern Sea City. These nobles were basically very powerful in the local area. For these nobles, the large number of refugees in the city was a completely unstable factor. They were very happy that Deepwater City was willing to accept these refugees. At the same time, Deepwater City's immigration officials also said that they could use white sugar, toilet paper, and rum in exchange. When the nobles heard that they could use the refugees, who were useless and would even affect the stability of the society, to exchange for these goods, the nobles went crazy. They directly sent troops to capture the refugees in their territories. Translator, WQL Editor. Alim. The immigration route of Deepwater City was very busy. At its peak, 16 ships were delivered to Deepwater City in one day. About 400 people were loaded on the ships every day. About 6,000 to 7,000 immigrants were delivered in one day. With this kind of cooperation, the number of immigrants increased rapidly. On average, Deepwater City could immigrate 120,000 to 130,000 people a month. After these immigrants arrived in Deepwater City, apart from a portion of them staying at the port to support the city's construction, the rest were sent to Northern Town. Then, Northern Town would distribute them to Mirror Lake City and the new city. The arrival of a large number of people put pressure on the North Town city. All kinds of living materials were consumed quickly. The most urgent thing was food. Fortunately, Su Luen had always been very careful, so the North Town city stored a large amount of food every year. It was also because of this food that Su Len dared to immigrate so many people. Because of the harvest altar in Northern Town, the production of food was very high. 1 mu of land could produce 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of potatoes. In Northern Town, Su Len planted 500,000 mu of potatoes. The output of potatoes alone was enough to feed 1 million people for a year. Moreover, potatoes could be planted in North Wind Principality for 2 seasons. In addition to the fish and various kinds of beef and mutton around Northern Town, it could be said that Northern Town had enough strength to feed these immigrants. As long as they could survive the first year, the food production in Northern Town would increase. Basically, they didn't have to worry about not having enough food. However, the large number of immigrants also brought a lot of problems. For example, there wasn't enough housing, and there was a serious shortage of grassroots officials. With the arrival of these new immigrants, the city's environment began to deteriorate. These immigrants didn't have any hygiene awareness. It was common for them to urinate and defecate everywhere. Originally, it was the grassroots officials who trained them. However, there were too many immigrants. Northern Town was seriously understaffed. At the same time, many immigrants took advantage of the lack of manpower in Northern Town and began to commit all kinds of crimes. Many of these immigrants used to be gang members. When they saw that North Wind Principality was prosperous and didn't have any gangs, they were overjoyed. They quickly contacted their old friends to form gangs and divide the territory. However, they didn't expect Su Len to attach so much importance to the safety of the city. After discovering that the grassroots officials were understaffed, They immediately called in the army of Northern Town to help maintain order. Chapter 670. In the laboratory, Sullen's figure appeared in the teleportation array with a flash of magic light. "Do you have juice? Quick, give me a glass. I want it iced." Su Len shouted as soon as he walked out of the teleportation array. A clay golem next to him immediately went to prepare it. "How is it? Is it solved?" Hathaway didn't raise her head as she wrote and drew on the table. "It's solved for the time being." Su Len sat down on the chair next to him, took the juice from the clay golem, and then raised his head to drink it. "Phew! It's so comfortable." Su Len drank the ice juice in one gulp and then breathed a sigh of relief with a relaxed expression. "It's solved for the time being?" Hathaway said with some surprise. "Yes, it's only solved for the time being." Su Len shook his head and said, "The number of immigrants is too large now, and the number of grassroots officials is seriously insufficient. Although I have ordered more students to be recruited for training, it will take at least 3 months for this group of people to complete the training. And even if this group of people completes the training, the number of grassroots officials will be lacking in time. The growth of our grassroots officials can't keep up with the number of immigrants." Su Len said helplessly. "We need to expand the training school for grassroots officials." Hathaway also realized the trouble of the matter. "I also thought of this, but the problem is that we have a serious shortage of teachers and can't expand the scale of the school. However, I have asked the immigration officials of Deepwater City to recruit scholars from the south. I believe the first batch of scholars will arrive soon. We can promote some people from those immigrants. There should be some suitable people among these immigrants. I remember that during the immigration process, these immigrants have been divided into different groups. Those group leaders can play a role." Hathaway thought for a moment and said, "We can conduct emergency training for these group leaders. They don't need to be strong, as long as they can complete some simple tasks and reduce the burden of grassroots officials. By the way, some of the soldiers in Northern Battlefront City can also be transferred to deal with emergencies. You should know that the soldiers in Northern Battlefront City are basically elites, obedient, and highly disciplined. They can temporarily serve as grassroots officials." Hathaway quickly came up with a solution. "Sure." Su Len agreed after thinking for a while. The army in Northtown City was indeed elite. These soldiers had gone through strict training. They were very good at obeying orders and executing orders. After some simple training, they would be able to do the work of the grassroots officials. Of course, it was only a temporary measure. The best way was to let the grassroots officials do the work. What they needed to do now was to continuously expand the number of people the academy could recruit. "Well, that's it for the time being," Su Len said. "By the way, how's your experiment going?" "We've already started the first experiment," Hathaway said with a smile. After several years of research, the elemental fusion furnace was ready to be officially tested. Of course, the experimental elemental fusion furnace was much smaller, only about 1% of the energy efficiency of a real elemental fusion furnace. This was naturally done to prevent the explosion of the elemental furnace from causing serious damage. "I'm planning to put the experiment in the half-plane we've established. That way, even if the experiment fails, and the elemental fusion furnace explodes, it won't cause any damage to the material world or the city," Hathaway said. "All right, I agree. But I have to go with you to the experiment. You have to stand at a safe distance during the experiment," Su Len emphasized. "All right." Hathaway nodded in agreement. "This is the experimental version of the elemental fusion furnace I just made." Hathaway snapped her fingers. A space portal opened. Inside the portal was something that looked a little rough and strange. "It looks so ugly," Su Len said with a frown. "It can't be helped. This is only the first version of the experiment. It will definitely be improved in the future. By then, it will look even prettier. Of course, we should be more concerned about whether this equipment can work properly or not," Hathaway said after hearing Sullen's words, rolling her eyes at him. "All right, as long as the experiment is successful, I can accept it even if it's a little uglier," Su Len said with a shrug. Plane portal. A flash of light descended from the sky and directly tore through space. Su Len and Hathaway entered the plane one after the other. This plane was the half-plane that Su Len and Hathaway had opened together. At this time, the half-plane was already 3 kilometers wide. The half-plane still looked very simple. The ground was dry, the gravity was very low, and the water source was obviously smaller. It would take at least a few hundred years to transform this half-plane into an existence that was not inferior to the material plane. But now, the simple environment here was just right for the experiment. The rock golems are ready. Let them move the elemental furnace over. Su Len kept urging. Soon, the two rock golems carefully moved the elemental furnace over. After arriving at the center of the half-plane, Hathaway did not immediately start the experiment. Instead, she began to set up various defensive runic circles around the elemental furnace. These defensive runic circles would reduce the power of the explosion of the experimental model layer by layer. After all, the half-plane was not large. If it really exploded, these defensive measures would minimize the damage. Although Su Len agreed to use the half-plane as a test site, he did not want the half-plane to collapse in the event of an explosion. After all, it was very safe to open a half-plane house. After confirming, Hathaway put a small spoonful of elemental fuel into the elemental fusion furnace. Next was the most crucial moment. Elemental fusion furnace number 1 experimental body is undergoing actual combat training. System self-check is in progress. System self-check has been completed. Connecting the energy channel. Everything was carried out in an orderly manner. All the tests were completed. The elemental fusion furnace experimental body was quickly completed. Hathaway took a deep breath and suddenly opened her eyes. Begin. Elemental fusion furnace number 1 experimental body is in operation. Igniting. An extremely dazzling light fell from the sky. This light beam fell from the sky and instantly hit the fuel in the elemental furnace. The fuel in the elemental furnace was ignited by the light beam and instantly started working. A powerful elemental energy quickly appeared. In just a few minutes, it reached an astonishing level. Then, a shocking amount of energy surged out of the energy channels connected to the elemental furnace. This energy was quickly injected into the half-plane under the effect of the elemental runic circles. With the injection of this energy, the half-plane slowly began to expand. Chapter 671. Light blue elemental energy gushed out of the elemental fusion furnace. The furnace began to operate normally, and large amounts of energy continued to pour out, causing the semi-plane to expand. The elemental fusion furnace continued to pour out huge amounts of energy. In just a short while, the amount of energy gushing out had already exceeded the energy consumption of a level 9 spell. According to this standard, the elemental fusion furnace could produce 10 times more energy than an elemental fission furnace in the same amount of time. This was only because the elemental fusion furnace was only an experimental version. If it were an actual elemental fusion furnace, its energy output would be dozens of times greater. As the elemental energy continued to pour out, the semi-plane expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. Su Len and Hathaway did not relax in the slightest. Although the elemental fusion furnace had been operating well for a while, no one could be sure that it was safe before the experiment was completed. Elemental furnace current load is 60%. Current operation is normal. Energy transmission is normal. Elemental furnace target room temperature is 28 million degrees. The temperature is still rising. Binding force field is stable. Elemental combustion is accelerating. Streams of data were constantly being collected, and then appeared on the virtual screen in front of them. On the other side of the virtual screen was a three-dimensional model of the elemental fusion furnace. Every part of the model had a different color, and these colors represented the current state of the elemental furnace. Everything is operating normally now. We can consider increasing the power output, Alex said after confirming that all the data were normal. From the beginning until now, the elemental furnace has been operating according to our plan. We can try increasing the power output, Hathaway said seriously. Then let's begin, Su Len said with a serious expression. Begin pressurizing. With Hathaway's command, the elemental furnace continued to pressurize. The energy binding force field restrained the energy produced by the elemental fusion to the center, and the temperature of the elemental furnace began to rise. Elemental fusion furnace temperature is rising. Current temperature is 32 million degrees. Energy binding force field is operating normally. Elemental furnace output is increasing. Energy channel is operating normally. Current load is 65%. Elemental fuel combustion is accelerating. Searing beam, activate. As the order was given, Scorching rays of extremely high temperature were instantly activated, and then heated up the center of the energy-binding force field. If one were to observe the interior of the elemental furnace at this time, they would discover that it was as if a small sun had risen inside. Unimaginable light and heat were being emitted from this sun, and a heart-palpitating energy was spreading from here. The originally astonishing energy increased once again. In the monitoring runic array set up by Hathaway, the demiplane's expansion speed increased once again, and the entire demiplane's energy fluctuations were abnormally active. On the virtual projection, the original projection of the elemental furnace began to change. Originally, most of the projections of the elemental furnace were green or blue, but after the increase in efficiency, the color gradually began to change to yellow. As the energy core of the floating space city, the elemental furnace was the energy source of the entire floating space city. The amount of energy it needed to provide was astonishing. How heavy was a city? A floating space tower alone weighed millions of tons. In comparison, the larger floating space city weighed at least hundreds of millions of tons. The amount of energy needed to lift such a heavy object was astonishing, and just lifting it was not enough. The elemental furnace needed to steadily supply energy to the floating space city for a long time, so the requirements for the elemental furnace were even higher. In the period of the ancient arcane empire, only the mice energy nucleus could do this. The mice energy nucleus was a miracle creation that Su Len did not know its specific structure and operation method until now. It did not need to be added with dyes, it was completely clean and pollution-free, and its operation was stable, and its energy output was gentle. It could be said to be a very ideal energy core. It was said that this energy core was made by the goddess of magic and some great arcanists, and it used the power of the magic net. The mice energy nucleus was a hub in the magic net. The magic net was a power woven by the goddess of magic that covered the entire demi-plane. The existence of the magic net made the originally free and violent elemental energy calm down and tame the energy. This big net that covered the demi-plane could control an amazing amount of energy. From the age of thorium to the early period of the Arcane Empire, all the floating space cities relied on the magic net and the mice energy nucleus. The reason for the end of the age of thorium was that a great arcanist at that time coveted the authority of the gods and wanted to seize control of the magic net. As a result, the moment he succeeded, the magic net exploded, leading to the collapse of the magic net on the material plane. This sudden disaster directly caused the floating space cities of the age of thorium to fall from the sky. At the same time, the collapse of the magic net also caused a large number of arcanists to be unable to cast spells. Only a few talented arcanists had a leap in their strength. By the time of the Arcane Empire, the arcanists learned the lesson of the destruction of the age of thorium and began to create energy hubs that did not rely on the magic net. The elemental furnace was born on this basis. Because of the great arcanist, the grave digger of the age of thorium, the goddess of magic blocked spells above the 10th circle, and at the same time, blocked a lot of knowledge. The arcanists once again established a glorious arcane civilization from the ruins of the age of thorium. However, the floating space cities were still not solved. The only floating space cities were basically built together with the goddess of magic. Some wizards also found one or two complete mice energy nuclei from the ruins of the age of thorium. In order to develop another energy source that could replace the mice energy nucleus, these arcanists also began to study the power of the magic net. After in-depth study of the magic net created by the goddess of magic, these great arcanists combined the characteristics of the magic net with the riddles after many years of research and finally created something very similar to the magic net. This was called the artificial magic net, but unlike the magic net of the goddess of magic, which could cover the material plane, the artificial magic net could only cover an area of 50 kilometers around the floating space tower. But even so, the power of this artificial magic net was extremely amazing. In the artificial magic net, the great arcanists did not have to worry about the lack of magic power at all. The artificial magic net could provide almost endless energy. This was also the reason why the great arcanists during the Arcane Empire could rival the gods. Chapter 672. The reason why the gods were powerful, in addition to their amazing power, was that their god's kingdom could provide them with a steady stream of divine power. Although the divine power possessed by the gods themselves was huge, it was also limited. However, the gods could continuously replenish their divine power through their god's kingdom. As long as the divine power in their god's kingdom was not exhausted, their divine power would not dry up. After the great arcanists had the artificial magic net, they also had the power similar to the gods. As long as they were in the range of the artificial magic net, the great arcanists could get a steady stream of divine power. In addition to the artificial magic net, another important core was the elemental furnace. The development of the elemental furnace was very difficult. After all, magic energy was a very violent energy, and a little carelessness could cause serious consequences. In history, there had been several energy leaks in the floating city of the Arcane Kingdom, which had led to serious consequences. The most serious case even directly led to the abandonment of a floating city. This kind of energy pollution was also very serious to the natural world. At that time, the great arcanists of the Arcane Kingdom spent a lot of time and methods to solve the pollution perfectly. This also led to the conflict between the arcanists and the druids. As druids, they were very dissatisfied with the great arcanists' wanton destruction of the natural environment and pollution. If the Arcane Kingdom was not so strong, the druids would have already gone to war with them. However, the arcanists finally realized that there was a problem after causing a serious leak. Thus, they created an extremely strict safety protocol. They also stipulated that excessive pollution experiments were prohibited in the material plane. Experiments such as the elemental furnace were not supposed to be carried out in the material plane. Later, after the destruction of the Arcane Kingdom, some other races wanted to get the strong power of the Arcane Kingdom, so they secretly organized people to do research, but there was almost no good end for them. The most famous was the dwarves. These greedy guys were very envious after seeing the almost endless energy of the arcane furnace, and then they wanted to master this power. At the same time, they made some changes according to the elemental furnace. These dwarves secretly built a huge golem in Furnace Core Castle. The golem was more than 10 meters tall and had astonishing power. If these dwarves succeeded, they would definitely become the overlord of a region. It wouldn't be impossible for them to rule the entire continent. However, the dwarves' experiment was a complete failure. It was said that the elemental furnace had a big explosion, and the whole furnace castle was blown beyond recognition. The whole city was destroyed in this loud noise. At the same time, the explosion also caused serious pollution. The refugees who survived the explosion fell sick and died from the terrible pollution. The largest city of the dwarves, Hearthcore Castle, home to more than 100,000 people, was completely destroyed. At the same time, the aftermath wasn't over yet. After the destruction of Furnace Fortress, the explosion of the elemental furnace directly pierced through the ground, waking up the terrifying flame fiend that had been sleeping in the depths of the earth since the last era. The awakened flame fiends began to attack the surviving dwarves. Under such circumstances, Furnace City was directly destroyed. The once powerful dwarf kingdom fell apart in this disaster. It was also from this day onwards that the dwarf kingdom was divided into 7 parts. Because of all kinds of conflicts and interests, these dwarves began to stray further and further away. There were even a few dwarves who had become enemies. In addition to the explosion caused by the dwarves' research, there were many people on the continent who wanted to obtain the craftsmanship of the Arcane Empire. The wizards had inherited most of the magic power, but they had never succeeded in creating such a dangerous elemental furnace. In the past, many wizard schools had wanted to create such an elemental furnace and had conducted experiments. To prevent accidents, these people had purposely chosen deserts to conduct their experiments. Naturally, they had also failed. As a result, the elemental furnace had been abandoned. The elemental furnace continued to operate. Massive amounts of elemental energy continuously surged out of the furnace, and the energy in the pseudoplane became more and more abundant. Elemental furnace operating normally. Energy channel operating normally. Energy channel not overloaded. Energy binding force field operating normally. Elemental fusion furnace load reached 73%. Elemental furnace operating normally. As the voice of Tower Spirit number 1 rang out, various indicators of the elemental furnace appeared in front of him. As the elemental furnace continued to operate, so did the numbers. Elemental fusion furnace temperature rising. Current temperature is 52 million degrees. Energy binding force field operating normally. Energy output from elemental furnace increasing. Energy channel operating normally. Current load is at 82%. Elemental fuel burning increasing. As time passed, more and more elemental energy was transported to other parts of the pseudoplane by the energy channel. Compared to the beginning, the pseudoplane had expanded many times. The pseudoplane was originally only 3 kilometers in diameter, but with the powerful energy supply from the elemental furnace, it had reached a shocking 10 kilometers in diameter. It only took him 2 to 3 hours to do so. The growth rate of a pseudoplane like this was extremely shocking. Sufficient energy was pushing the pseudoplane to expand. Beep beep beep. Elemental furnace load has reached 85%. Elemental furnace operating normally. Energy binding force field fluctuating. Increasing energy binding force field. At this moment, a notification sounded. Su-Len, Hathaway, and Alex looked at the elemental furnace nervously. After reaching 85% of the energy load, the elemental furnace finally had some minor problems, but it was quickly improved. Continue to increase the load. Su-Len glanced at the elemental fusion furnace and said, "Success or failure depends on this." "Okay." Hathaway nodded vigorously. With Hathaway's command, the elemental furnace began to increase its efficiency again. Continue to increase the load. On the elemental furnace model, the original green and blue had completely disappeared, replaced by yellow and red. It was still increasing. The load of the elemental furnace also began to increase, and soon reached 95%. Seeing this, Hathaway took a deep breath and ordered to continue increasing it. At this moment, a large area of red suddenly appeared on the elemental furnace model. At the same time, Tower Spirit Number 1 began to sound the alarm. "Warning, warning, the elemental furnace is collapsing. Immediately stop the experiment." Boom! Chapter 673. Warning, warning. There is a strong fluctuation in the binding force field. Warning, warning. The pressure in the combustion chamber is rising rapidly. Warning, warning. The cooling system has failed. Warning, warning. The heat shielding system has collapsed. Warning, warning. The elemental furnace is shaking violently. Please stop the operation immediately. Forceful stop program activated. Forceful decompression and cooling system activated. A series of sharp and ear-piercing alarms sounded in the room. Su-Len, Hathaway, Alex, and the others' faces suddenly changed, and they quickly activated the backup method. Space isolation system activated. Energy shield activated. Soft decompression and buffer spell activated. As Hathaway gave the order, a space barrier immediately rose in the half-plane, dividing the half-plane into two spaces. Then, in the half-plane where the elemental furnace was operating, an energy shield quickly rose, and at the same time, a large amount of aqua-blue liquid was constantly filling it. This aqua-blue liquid was a special buffer liquid that Hathaway and many other wizards made, and it could absorb the shock wave of the explosion to the maximum extent. Warning! Warning! The forceful stop program has failed. Warning! Warning! The forceful decompression and cooling system has failed. Warning! Warning! The pressure in the elemental furnace is rising rapidly, approaching the critical value. It is estimated to explode in 7 seconds. Please prepare for defense. 6, 5, 4. Su-Len and the others did not care about anything else, and they all activated their spells. Now, the energy wave above the elemental furnace had exceeded that of a level 10 spell. Although Hathaway and the others had done hundreds of calculations and prepared various defensive measures before the experiment, they still did not dare to be the slightest bit careless when the elemental furnace exploded. 3, 2, 1. Rumble! A dazzling light instantly erupted from the elemental furnace, and a huge mushroom cloud rose from the half-plane. Violent energy completely erupted at this moment, and flames as high as hundreds of thousands of degrees swept across the entire half-plane at this moment. At the core of the explosion, the intensity of the light could reach thousands of times that of the sun. Such a strong light could blind human eyes in an instant. The high temperature of the explosion directly vaporized the ground, and a huge crater appeared on the ground. The ground cracked under the pressure, and the sand on the ground melted into a glass-like state under the terrifying high temperature. The shock wave that swept through everything destroyed everything in its path. The powerful impact hit the protective barrier. At this moment, the protective barrier was like a bubble, bursting open with a bang. After the shockwave broke through an energy barrier, it continued to move forward, shattering one energy barrier after another. All defensive spells were like paper in front of this shockwave. Finally, after breaking through a dozen defensive spells, it hit the blue buffer liquid. The buffer liquid kept churning under the influence of the shockwave before quickly evaporating. It only took a few seconds for the buffer liquid to completely evaporate. The explosion brought a tyrannical power that destroyed the defensive measures Hathaway and the others had set up in advance. The entire demiplane was swept away by the shockwave, and a layer of the demiplane's ground was fiercely scraped by the shockwave. After the shockwave broke through all the defensive barriers, it fiercely hit the spatial barrier. Then, that powerful shockwave started spreading in all directions. But before that shockwave dissipated, an even more powerful shockwave surged over. One after another, the shockwaves kept bombarding the demiplane's spatial barrier. The narrow demiplane made these shockwaves bounce back and forth, but the shockwaves kept being generated until the entire half-plane was filled with shockwaves. The entire demiplane was like a cork blocking the mouth of a volcano. Under the influence of this powerful force, the originally hard space barrier began to loosen under the impact. The planar barrier began to slowly expand outwards, and the speed of expansion was getting faster and faster. Under the continuous impact of the powerful shockwaves, the planar barrier was forcibly squeezed and expanded. The entire half-plane looked like it had reached the end of the world. The ground was fragmented by the shockwaves, and cracks appeared on the spatial barrier due to the rapid expansion. The demiplane was on the verge of collapse from that explosion. It looked like the demiplane would have been destroyed if the power had been just a bit stronger. Fortunately, Sulen and Hathaway's previous arrangements had some effect and weakened the power of the explosion. Although the spatial barrier was on the verge of collapse, it was still stable. At the same time, the demiplane's elemental forge's explosive peak finally passed. After the peak, the power of the shockwave started to slowly decrease. The shockwave started to weaken, and the flames caused by the explosion also started to slowly decrease, but the temperature of the demiplane was still extremely shocking. "What's the situation in the demiplane now?" Sulen asked. The explosion just now directly destroyed all the monitoring equipment and detection runic arrays in the demiplane. Even the part of the space that was separated by the spatial barrier in advance was destroyed in the explosion. After all, the spatial barrier that was temporarily separated wasn't very strong. Under such circumstances, it only lasted for a while before completely collapsing. However, even if it only lasted for a while, a large amount of information was collected. This information was immediately transmitted to the Tower of the North Wind's astrology platform. According to our calculations, it will take at least 3 to 5 days for the demiplane to calm down. As for entering again, it will take at least a month. The shock waves caused by the explosion destroyed everything in the demiplane. The ground shattered, the water evaporated, and the dust was completely raised and covered the entire demiplane. This dust will continue to float above the demiplane for at least half a year. The most serious thing is the magic energy pollution caused by the explosion. This kind of pollution will cause serious harm to living things. If this pollution isn't cleaned up, it will exist for at least 30 years. Judging from the energy produced by the explosion, a large amount of the spatial barrier has been shattered. It is very likely that a spatial storm will appear in the plane. However, this is also a good thing. The creation of a spatial storm can help us clean up the pollution faster. Although this experiment failed, we still gained a lot of benefits. Chapter 674. The impact of the explosion expanded the demiplane by 5 times. In addition to the expansion caused by the input of energy from the elemental furnace, the entire demiplane is now 7 or 8 times larger than before. As long as the magic energy pollution is removed, this demiplane can be used as a logistics base for the floating city. Hathaway said with a smile. Those spatial rifts still need to be repaired. With the pollution, we won't be able to use this demiplane for the time being. Sulen shook his head. At this moment, Chris suddenly said, "I have an idea." "Oh, what idea?" Sulen asked with some interest. Although this demiplane is polluted and has spatial storms, and although ordinary people can't survive, there are still other creatures that can. At the very least, the high-level demons of the abyss can, Chrissy explained. The environment in the abyss was very bad. Sulen had been there before, so he naturally knew that the environment in the abyss was even worse than the demiplane's current situation. Since demons could live in the bottomless abyss, they would naturally be able to live in this demiplane. Of course, ordinary demons can't survive in this environment, so our target is the high-grade demons. With my current ability, I can enslave about 10 high-grade demons. Chris nodded. This is indeed a good idea. Moreover, these demons are quite strong and have some spell-like abilities. It's very feasible to use them to repair the demiplane. Hathaway, Alex, how many high-grade demons can you enslave? Su-Len asked directly. I can enslave about 5, Hathaway said. I can enslave 3. Alex was a bit embarrassed. That's 18 in total. Not bad. Su-Len nodded. I can probably enslave 24 high-grade demons in total. The demiplane's area is now 10 times larger than before. It's about 10 kilometers in radius. The area isn't too big. 24 high-grade demons should be enough. Then let's do that. Su-Len decided after some consideration. By the way, Hathaway, summarize the cause of the explosion as soon as possible. Although the experiment failed, we still gained a lot from it. When the elemental fusion furnace is operating at 80% capacity, its operation is still very stable. Of course, there are still many shortcomings, but I believe that with the experience of this failure, it won't take long for us to successfully create a real elemental fusion furnace. I will. Although this experiment failed in the end, looking at the overall situation, there is no problem with our train of thought. I believe that after a few more experiments, we will succeed, Hathaway said with a smile. How many more tests do we need? Su-Len shook his head. We've spent almost 2 million kinners worth of materials on this experiment. If we do it a few more times, I'm afraid that Northtown City will go bankrupt. Don't worry. The explosion happened because it was the first time. It's normal for this kind of problem to occur. But with this experience, we will pay more attention to the next experiment, Hathaway said with a smile. They were a little guilty of directly exploding 2 million kinners worth of materials in one experiment. Moreover, these 2 million kinners worth of materials were only the materials for the elemental furnace. The various defensive runic matrices in the demiplane were still there. Repairing the demiplane would require at least another 2 million kinners worth of funds. If they really exploded 2 to 3 million kinners worth of materials in each experiment, even if they had a mountain of gold, they wouldn't be able to keep up with the consumption. In the next few experiments, apart from spending a lot of money and materials to remake the elemental furnace, as long as they were careful, there wouldn't be any more explosions. The next experiments would be to improve these elemental furnaces. The top-quality lava crystal that Su-Len obtained last time was an important material for making the elemental furnace. Although the temperature in the elemental furnace could reach tens of millions of degrees, and even steel would be vaporized in an instant, the elemental furnace could withstand such high temperatures without being damaged. Of course, the elemental furnace wouldn't directly withstand such high temperatures. As far as Su-Len knew, there was no metal that could withstand such high temperatures. The elemental furnace didn't directly withstand such high temperatures. There was a combustion chamber inside the elemental furnace, and the elemental fuel was ignited in the combustion chamber. This combustion chamber cooperated with the energy binding force field to bind the elemental fuel undergoing the elemental fission reaction in a space. This was equivalent to a small sun. The energy released by the elemental fission would be collected and converted by the energy conversion runic matrices next to it. Then, the energy would be transmitted through the elemental energy channel. In fact, the theoretical knowledge of the elemental furnace had been completed long ago. The difficulty lay in the materials. Although they didn't need materials that could withstand the high temperatures of tens of millions of degrees, the materials that could be used to make the combustion chamber were still very precious. In addition to the materials, there was also the runic magic matrices. The materials needed for the energy-binding magic matrices were also very precious. It had to be known that the energy-binding magic matrices needed to bind an astonishing amount of energy. After the elemental fuel underwent the fission reaction, the energy released every minute could reach the level of a level 9 spell or even higher. If the energy-binding magic matrices didn't have enough power to bind such energy, it would cause the small sun to go out of control. A large amount of energy would directly rush out of the combustion chamber, and the combustion chamber would be destroyed by the high temperature in an instant. After the combustion chamber was destroyed, the other parts of the elemental furnace wouldn't be able to withstand such high temperatures. As a result, the elemental furnace would directly explode like the previous experimental body. The materials needed to make the energy-binding magic matrices were very precious. It required more than a dozen high-quality magic gems. At the same time, it also needed orichalcum, mithril, and other metals. In general, such an energy-binding magic matrices required 300,000 to 500,000 kinner. After many simulation experiments, Hathaway finally made such an energy-binding magic matrices. But this time, there were still some problems and needed to be improved. However, this time, The energy-binding magic matrices could reach more than 80% power. There weren't many things that needed to be changed. In fact, the elemental furnace that Su Len and Hathaway were going to make was slightly higher than the standard from the beginning of the design. This way, even if the elemental furnace could only reach 90% power, it would be practical. Chapter 675. The failure of the elemental fusion furnace experiment did not affect Northern Town at all. Other than Su Len and a few others, no one knew about this experiment. The explosion in the half-plane did not affect other places at all. Although the demi-plane was riddled with holes, Northgard City was still prosperous. The morning sun dispersed the mist that covered the city, and the Pearl of the Northern region woke up. As soon as Su Luan got up, Angela and Anna brought over the breakfast they had prepared earlier. There was a delicate fruit salad, a large piece of ham sandwich, and a piece of roasted meat with tantalizing aroma. You'll get tired of eating these things every day, no matter how delicious they are. Su Luan picked up the breakfast and tasted it. Su Len said as he ate, "When we have time, I'll ask Frodo to make spicy soup, tofu pudding, fried dough sticks, and steamed dumplings." Su Len had not tasted these things for more than 10 years, and he suddenly wanted to try them again. After Su Luan finished breakfast and went out, other people in the Wizard Tower were already busy in an orderly manner. Because the palace in the North City had been demolished, Su Luan had now moved to the North Wind Tower to live. Although the North Wind Tower was not as big as the palace, it had many advantages. The rooms were close to each other, so it was convenient for him to visit at night. If he was in the mood, he could go to the rooms of Chris, Hathaway, and Karina. After breakfast, Su Len did not go to the lab directly. Instead, he went to the Northwind Academy. The Northwind Academy had recruited more than 10 wandering wizards with good conditions. Most of them were intermediate to low-ranking wizards. As for high-ranking wizards, it was very unlikely. After all, most high-ranking wizards would choose to join a wizard organization or establish a wizard family. Compared to low-ranking wizards, high-ranking wizards would spend a lot of time on all kinds of experiments. These experiments required a lot of magic materials, and it would take a lot of time for them to gather all the materials for their experiments. Wandering adepts had to spend a lot of time collecting materials, or earn a lot of money to buy materials. As a result, wandering adepts didn't have much time to conduct experiments. As a result, their strength, knowledge, and other aspects were far behind the Academy adepts. Although the low-ranking wizards recruited by the Northwind Tower were not very powerful, they were more than enough to teach apprentices. Finally, Hathaway and Alex did not have to take out some time to teach them every month. There were thousands of apprentices in the Northwind Academy. Of course, according to the normal rate of promotion, about 60% of them would become rank 1 wizards, and the rest could only be apprentices. The resources of the Sorcerer Academy were limited. It was impossible for them to provide everything to all the apprentice sorcerers. Also, due to the problem of their own aptitude, those apprentice sorcerers would need 5 or even 10 times more resources to become an official sorcerer than a sorcerer with good aptitude. Just like any other Sorcerer Academy or sorcerer organization, the Northwind Academy was a sorcerer organization. The Sorcerer Academy would not provide all the resources that the apprentice sorcerers needed. Instead, the apprentice sorcerers needed to do all kinds of work in exchange for those resources, even knowledge. It was not easy to become a wizard. In addition to their own efforts, other knowledge, luck, and so on were indispensable. Although the North Wind Academy had only been established for a few years, with the support of the North Wind Tower and Su Luan, it had developed very quickly. Looking at the numerous wizard apprentices rushing through the academy, Su Luan's heart was surging with excitement. He looked at these people as if he was looking at a group of green leeks. These wizard apprentices would be an important labor force in the floating city in the future. The floating city was in the era of the Arcane Empire, and it was also the crystallization of the wizard's highest wisdom. A large number of wizards would be required to exert its full power. There were a lot of jobs in the floating city that needed them. Although the tower spirit was very intelligent and could help Su Len control the entire floating city, the cost of a tower spirit was too high. Even Su Len could not make hundreds of tower spirits to work in the floating city. Perhaps in the legendary Nirvana mechanical mirror, there was such a huge city that was completely controlled by the tower spirit. The Nirvana mechanical mirror was said to be a world created by the great arcanists of the Arcane Empire. This world was a magical plane. The residents were all kinds of golems and other construct creatures. In addition to these construct creatures, there were also the Fermi ants. These creatures were not friendly to outsiders. Legend had it that the floating city of the Arcane Empire was preserved in the Nirvana mechanical mirror. The entire mechanical plane had a golem factory, which could produce all kinds of golem constructs. However, since the destruction of the Arcane Empire, the Nirvana mechanical mirror had been closed. Until now, no one had been to that world. Sullen's design of the floating city would have 50,000 to 100,000 people living in it, including at least 3,000 wizards. As far as the current situation was concerned, there was a big shortage of wizards. However, with the North Wind Academy, as long as it lasted for 10 or 20 years, these wizards would eventually be gathered. After patrolling around the North Wind Academy, Sulen returned to the North Wind Tower. In the astrology platform, Hathaway's fingers shook slightly, and a flash of light flashed in an instant. Then, a three-dimensional image appeared in front of everyone. This is the first phase model of the floating city. In our plan, this city will have a perfect ecological system that can simulate the environment in the main material plane to the greatest extent. It includes a life support system, an air circulation system, a water circulation system, and an elemental balance system. The life circulation system is used to transform the waste produced in the floating city into various nutrients and other substances to maintain the growth of other creatures in the floating city. The air circulation system is composed of 12 air cabins and 6 conversion rune matrices. They can purify, transform, and decompose the air to release the air that ordinary people need. At the same time, it is connected to the outside of the wind elemental plane. This place can provide us with sufficient air. The water circulation system is composed of 3 artificial lakes. The artificial lakes will be equipped with purification systems to purify all kinds of water into harmless and drinkable water. Of course, drinking water is still different from drinking water. In addition, we have also opened a water elemental channel to obtain water from the water elemental plane. The elemental balance system is used to balance the 4 major elements in the floating city so that the 4 major elements maintain balance. There will not be too many elements that affect the balance and eventually lead to the collapse of the elements. Chapter 676. On the long table, Hathaway unfolded the parts of the floating city one by one and showed them to the other high-grade wizards of the Tower of North Wind. The construction of a floating city required hundreds of thousands of parts. It required a lot of manpower. A group of wizards from the Tower of North Wind surrounded the 3D model that Hathaway showed them. Andre touched his monocle and said, "I can make the water element circulation system." As a wizard with the legendary bloodline of a water demon, Andre's control of water elements was the strongest under the legendary level. He was the most suitable person to make the water element circulation system. But I still need some special materials to make the water element circulation system. The water element purification system was not a very advanced technology. Many wizard organizations had this technology, but it still needed some precious materials, such as a high-quality water element crystal core. Normal water element crystal cores could be used to make a small water element circulation system, but the large water element circulation system used in the floating city required at least a high-grade water element crystal core. A water element crystal core of this quality could only be obtained by going to the water element plane. "I need to go to the water element plane," said Andre. "Do you need me to send someone with you?" Andre shook his head and said, "No need. My bloodline allows me to be like a fish in water in the water element plane. Other people will only slow me down." "All right then." Sulen nodded and said, "Leave the air circulation system to me." Seeing that the water element system was taken over by Andre, Alex said. As a legendary figure who had divinity and mastered the law of the wind element, making the air circulation system was a piece of cake for Alex. With her strength, it was not a problem for her to go to the wind element plane or open up an elemental tunnel later. "Leave the life circulation system to me," Hathaway said when she saw that both the air and water circulation systems were being made. Sulen looked at Hathaway with surprise and said, "You're in charge of the elemental furnace and you still have time to deal with the life circulation system?" "It's okay. The elemental furnace is already half completed. The rest of the work is not much. Just leave the life circulation system to me," Hathaway said with a smile. "All right then." Seeing Hathaway's insistence, Sulen nodded and agreed. Sulen and Hathaway did not talk about the life cycle system in detail. This life cycle system was a bit special. Sulen and Hathaway needed the wisdom tree to carry it out. This circulation system was only owned by a few wizard organizations, and Suren and Hathaway were only thinking of an alternative. Other than these, the elemental balance system was much simpler. He only needed to build an elemental pool, and then set the critical points of various elements in the elemental pool. If there was more to be extracted and less to be replenished, it would be fine. Other than the fact that the elemental pool was a little expensive to build, there was no other difficulty. Since the tasks have been assigned, we'll wait for you to finish them. As long as you don't take more than 2 years, it'll be fine, Sulen said in a deep voice. It would take a long time to build the floating city. Even if they directly used the Northtown city to modify it, it would take at least a few years. Therefore, they were not in a hurry to install these supporting systems. As for the other things, let's distribute them for construction. There were still a lot of things to do in the floating city. Sulen only arranged a part of it this time. In the blink of an eye, more than a month had passed. During this time, Hathaway carried out another experiment with the elemental furnace. With the experience from last time, these elemental furnaces did not explode. Of course, there were still some problems, and this experiment ended up consuming hundreds of thousands of kinner. The elemental furnace was constantly being perfected. Sulen, Hathaway, and Chrissy also began to summon demons. Demonology was a very important subject in the wizard school. Wizards had done a lot of research on demons. After all, demons were, in a strict sense, on the same level as the angels created by the gods. Demons also had a powerful ability to evolve. The original form of the Tana-Re demon was just a soul worm. This kind of creature could be stomped to death by a normal person. However, after countless battles, this soul worm could grow into a powerful Baylor demon. From the weakest existence all the way to a powerful legendary demon, it was simply incredible. In addition to the powerful ability to evolve, demons also had divinity. Of course, it was different from the divinity of the gods. The divinity of demons was chaotic, depraved, and so on. Many of the demigod liches extracted divinity from these demons. Demons were essentially soul creatures. Wizards were very interested in demons, especially this kind of evolutionary genetic chain. Many wizards were very envious of this kind of evolutionary ability. They wanted to have this ability, but so far, no one had succeeded. The research of these wizards was not without results. Demon warlocks and enslaving demons were all invented by them. In a special laboratory in the North Wind Tower, there was a tall altar in the center of the laboratory. There were a lot of strange symbols around the altar, and there was blood smeared on the side. A corpse was lying on its back. There was a dagger in the corpse's heart, and a lot of blood was flowing out from the heart. The whole altar looked gloomy and horrible, and it made people feel a chill in their hearts. This was the altar where Sulen and Hathaway were summoning demons. It was not easy to summon a high-grade demon. Sulen sent a few death row prisoners from the death row prison, and then used them to summon demons. As a light rose from Hathaway's body, a chaotic, twisted, and evil power appeared on the altar. Blood flowed on the ground, and the surrounding walls were carved with various demon reliefs. These demons looked ferocious and horrible, but they were lifelike. It seemed that they would come to life in the next second. The special corpse oil candles burned quietly. After the light flashed, a strong negative energy quickly appeared. Then, all the candles turned dark red. Evil, resentful, and chaotic whispers suddenly appeared. These were the whispers of the demons. At the same time, it was also called blasphemy by the church's priests. Sulen and Hathaway stared at the altar. As the evil and chaotic energy continued to grow, it finally rose to the top. Then, a strong spatial wave came, and a dark red portal appeared on top of the altar. In the next second, a tall figure went through the portal. Who is summoning the Almighty? Bang! Sulen's body flashed and appeared on the altar in an instant. Without saying a word, he punched the demon with his big fist and directly hammered it down. Cut the crap and get ready for the next one. Chapter 677. Who dares to attack the great? The Baylor roared. It wanted to resist, but its huge body was pressed to the ground by a foot. It couldn't move at all. Shut up! Sulen slapped the Baylor. The powerful force made the Baylor dizzy. Hathaway smiled and walked forward. She waved her staff quickly. A light flashed and instantly went into the Baylor's body. A silver magic chain slowly appeared on the Baylor's body. After seeing this chain, Sulen let go of his foot. The Baylor that was struggling jumped up and was about to slash down. However, as soon as it moved, the silver rune chain on its body flashed. The baler that was about to attack stiffened. Ah! With a painful roar, the baler fell to the ground in pain. What happened? Damn it, you want to control me. Don't even think about it. Even if I die, I won't give in to you despicable wizards. The baler roared angrily after noticing the strange state of its body. Half an hour passed. Master, what can I do for you? The 3-meter-tall baler tried to shrink his body and half-bowed to Su Luen with a fawning look. After a few days, Su Len, Hathaway, Alex, and Chris finally enslaved more than 20 high-grade demons. These high-rank fiends included balers, Glabrizu, Six-Armed Snake Fiend, Soul Judgment Fiend, and other high-rank fiends. After completing the enslavement, Su Luen and the others went to the demiplane again. The impact of the last big explosion hadn't dissipated, and the entire demiplane still had various traces of destruction. In order to protect this demiplane and prevent the demiplane from completely collapsing, Su Luen and Hathaway reinforced the demiplane after the explosion. As soon as Su Len entered the half-plane, he felt that the pollution index here was off the charts. The explosion of the elemental fusion furnace was very powerful, even though Hathaway had tried her best to weaken it. However, the aftermath of the explosion still caused serious damage to the place. Su Len clicked his tongue when he saw the scene in the half-plane. It was no wonder that such experiments were prohibited in the material plane since the era of the Arcane Empire. What a terrifying force! Hathaway exclaimed in surprise when she saw the demiplane. The dilapidated scene before his eyes was like a world that was about to be destroyed. This half-plane could no longer be seen in its original form. However, even though it had become dilapidated, the danger inside had not decreased in the slightest. The destruction of the half-plane left behind countless spatial cracks. These spatial cracks were equivalent to the power of the primordial slashes. It was equivalent to a high-tier spell. Moreover, many of the spatial cracks didn't have any abnormalities. If one wasn't strong enough, they would be directly dismembered by these spatial cracks. This is really troublesome. The pollution here will take at least 100 years to dissipate. It seems that we have to clean it up. I don't know if more than 20 high demons are enough. Su Len looked at the half-plane in front of him and had a headache. Should we go and enslave a few more high demons? Su Len found that these high demons were quite easy to enslave. He could summon them and beat them up without saying a word. After that, he could enslave them. If they dared to resist, there was no problem. He could just beat them up again. If they dared to resist, he could beat them up again. These high demons were wretched. He had to teach them a few good lessons before they became obedient. The strength of these high demons was not bad. Although they had not reached the legendary level, they were almost at the 4th grade. Although the environment in front of them was harsh, they could still survive. You guys will clean up and repair this half-plane. I'll give you some things in a while to clean up the pollution here and repair those spatial cracks. Hearing Sullen's words, these abyssal demons quickly nodded in agreement. They were very well behaved. By the way, there might be some violent elemental life forms in here. Su Len suddenly said. The half-plane originally had connecting channels to the 4 major elemental planes. Although they were closed at that time, there was a high chance that such a strong explosion would have broken these channels open. In this way, it was very likely that elemental life forms would enter here. Elemental life forms were originally neutral, but in this chaotic and polluted environment, there was a high chance that they would be polluted and become violent. This kind of high-intensity pollution energy was very harmful. Elemental energy would be disturbed. These are purifiers. Spray these purifiers all over the half-plane. Su Len took out the potion in a wooden bucket and said, "You need to spray this once a day in this half-plane. If you dare to slack off, humph, you know the consequences." Su Len snorted at the high demons in front of him. These high demons were all brainless things. They would not know how to work if he did not teach them a lesson. The purifiers prepared by Su Len were specially used to clean up pollution. However, the effect was average. It was fine for light pollution, but for this level of pollution, the effect was very limited. They could only spray continuously and dilute the pollution bit by bit. Boom! A fireball fell from the sky. Su Luen didn't even look at it. With a backhand slap, he scattered the fireball. It's a large fire elemental. Hathaway's figure sounded. Not far away, a burning flame appeared. This fire elemental looked rough and tough. Its upper body was a burning flame, and its lower body was somewhat like two legs. The originally bright flame had become a little dim, and there were a lot of sparks jumping around it. It looked quite violent and aggressive. Something delivered to my doorstep. Seeing this giant fire elemental, Sullen's eyes lit up, and he rushed over directly. The Thunder God's spear also appeared in his hand. Rumble! There was a violent explosion, and the surroundings were completely turned into a sea of fire. However, this sea of fire was quickly extinguished. Sullen's tall body walked out of the sea of fire, and he tossed a fist-sized red crystal up and down in his hand. My luck isn't bad. What a good start. A high-grade elemental core dropped right away. Sulen put away the elemental core with satisfaction. This kind of thing was somewhat similar to a soul crystal. It could also be used to make the soul core of a magic statue. Such an elemental core could be used to make a set of steel magic statues. However, not all elemental life forms would drop elemental cores. The drop rate was about 30%. Chapter 678. Sulen was also very happy to see the elemental cores drop. No one would complain about having too many elemental cores and soul crystals. With the golem factory, Sulen would never have enough elemental cores and soul crystals. After seeing the elemental cores drop, Sullen's interest was clearly piqued. After ordering the high demons to repair the plane, he directly started cleaning up the berserk elements in the demiplane. Most of the berserk elements in the demiplane were wind and fire elements. The number of earth elements was very small, and there was basically not a single water element. This was mainly caused by the explosion of the elemental furnace. The explosion caused serious damage to the earth, and the water source directly evaporated. Therefore, without water elements, earth elements also became very rare. The berserk elementals were very aggressive. After seeing Sulen, they immediately pounced on him, wanting to kill him. But these giant berserk elementals were only at the 4th rank at most, and the gap between them and Sulen was too big. The lightning spear swept across, and the berserk wind elementals' bodies collapsed and dissipated in an instant. With a soft clang, a fist-sized wind elemental core fell to the ground. Sulen gently waved his hand, and the wind elemental core directly flew into his palm. With a burst of crackling lightning, the wind elemental core returned to silence. In fact, there was a big difference between using an elemental core to make a golem and using a soul crystal to make a golem. Earth elemental cores were heavy and were more suitable for making stone golems, such as obsidian golems. Of course, it was also possible to make steel golems. Golems made with earth elemental cores would have defensive bonuses, but their speed would be correspondingly slower. Golems made of wind elemental crystal cores would be more agile and would have a corresponding increase in speed, but their defense would be slightly worse than other golems. Golems made of fire elemental crystal cores would have an increase in attack power, especially when it came to fire spells. But at the same time, their defense would be weakened. Golems made with water elemental cores could change their form, but the effect was limited. At the same time, their attributes would be more balanced. There were a lot of berserk elementals. Sulen found some spatial cracks in the demiplane that connected to the elemental planes. After all, when the demiplane was first established, Sulen had connected it to the elemental planes, allowing the demiplane to obtain the elemental energy of the 4 elemental planes and rapidly grow. Thus, Sullen's demiplane was actually quite close to the 4 elemental planes. When the elemental furnace exploded, the power of the explosion tore through the spatial cracks and connected to the elemental planes. Many of the elementals in the demiplane came here through these spatial cracks. The space barrier itself had the ability to repair itself. However, this self-repair ability was not very high. If the damage was too severe, it might take thousands or even tens of thousands of years to repair according to its self-repair ability. Although the demiplane looked quite miserable at first, Sulen and Hathaway had done a lot of protection before, so the real damage was not too serious. The spatial cracks that connected to the elemental planes had shrunk a lot, and such giant elementals could no longer pass through. Sulen set up a runic magic array around these spatial cracks to seal them again and speed up their recovery. The other spatial cracks also needed to be repaired, but these spatial cracks were more difficult to repair. Apart from the spatial rifts that connected to the elemental planes, the rest of the spatial rifts were basically spatial storms. These spatial storms were very destructive. If one were to accidentally fall into one of these spatial storms and not be able to escape in time, even a legendary powerhouse would fall. In the exploration of the astral plane, apart from encountering some powerful enemies, evil gods, abominations, and other monsters, the most dangerous thing was to be involved in a spatial storm. The power of spatial storms varied, and they erupted very suddenly. Once one was involved, it was basically equivalent to being attacked by at least the disintegration spell at all times. If the space-time storm was very strong, then the attack would be equivalent to the Great Disintegration spell, and even legendary powerhouses would not be able to withstand it. Moreover, this dissociation also had the effect of cracking. If one was not careful, all their luxurious equipment would be reduced to dregs. Su Lin was still very cautious about these spatial cracks, because this was only a spatial storm caused by the spatial cracks, and its power was limited. At most, it was only equivalent to the sixth circle spell dissociation. Su Lin could directly resist this level of spell with his body. Next, Su Lin and Hathaway began to repair these elemental cracks. Su Lin directly blocked the spatial cracks with his tyrannical body, blocking the spatial storms inside. Then, Hathaway set up a runic magic array around the spatial cracks. With Su Lin blocking the spatial cracks, the surrounding spatial storms naturally dissipated. Without the interference of these spatial storms, the speed of setting up the runic magic array was naturally much faster. Soon, a runic magic array was completed, and Su Lin left the spatial cracks. He saw that the raging spatial storms outside the spatial cracks had appeared again, and were rushing towards the cracks. However, as soon as they touched the spatial cracks, they were blocked by a transparent shield. Without the interference of the spatial storms, the spatial cracks began to recover faster. The spatial cracks that would have taken at least 5 or 6 years to recover now only took a little more than a year. Su Lin and Hathaway cleaned up the berserk elementals while sealing the spatial cracks. At the same time, they also commanded the high-ranked demons to clean up the pollution of the demiplane. They became very busy for a while. After spending 3 days, the berserk elementals in the demiplane were finally cleaned up. Their luck was pretty good. After cleaning up all the berserk elementals, Su Lin obtained a total of more than 30 elemental cores. These elemental cores were basically large pieces, and only a few were medium-sized. They were all sent to the golem factory, and would be enough to use for a long time. Su Lin looked at the elemental cores in his hand and grinned. His luck was still pretty good with more than a 30% drop rate. Elemental cores were still very mysterious. Sometimes, killing a dozen elemental cores might not necessarily result in one drop, and sometimes it would continuously drop. However, legendary elemental creatures were bound to drop elemental cores after death. It was just that very few dared to go to the elemental planes to hunt legendary elemental creatures. After all, elemental creatures in the elemental planes would be enhanced and become very difficult to deal with. Moreover, elemental creatures were rare creatures that could be the rulers of high-rank elementals. If one was unlucky, it was very likely that they would be ganged up on by a legendary elemental creature leading a large number of elementals. Chapter 679. Su Lin had never thought of going to the elemental plane to hunt legendary elementals or advanced elementals. Such actions would easily attract the attention of the elemental lords, or even the elemental gods. There were a large number of elemental lords, elemental gods, elemental oracles, and so on living in the elemental plane. Those elemental creatures were basically their people. Although the elemental gods rarely meddled, no one dared to underestimate their influence. It should be known that the elemental gods had directly defeated the demon army in the abyss. If he really provoked them, not to mention the elemental gods, even a few elemental oracles would be able to beat him up. Su Lin was very self-aware. There were quite a lot of creatures living in the elemental plane. For example, in the water elemental plane, there were many sea dragons living there. In the earth elemental plane, there were a large number of gem dragons living there. In the fire elemental plane, there were often red dragons, gold dragons, and magma dragons who liked to stay there. In the wind elemental plane there were even more. There were wind dragons, winged dragons, and a very rare creature, the feathered serpent god, also lived there. The feathered serpent god was a divine creature. When this creature grew up, its strength was similar to that of a giant dragon. The feathered serpent god looked very similar to the divine dragon in the Hua nation in his previous life, but they had a pair of wings. The feathered serpent god was a descendant of the ancient gods in ancient times. After the end of the ancient gods era, it lived in seclusion in another world. Now in the material plane, the feathered serpent god was very rare, even rarer than unicorns. However, in some ancient temples, statues of the feathered serpent god were often found. This also showed that the feathered serpent god was very active in ancient times. Similar to the feathered serpent god was the Eastern giant eagle, which was also a divine creature. Once in the ancient gods' era, the Eastern giant eagle had always followed the sun god. However, after the sun god fell in ancient times, these Eastern giant eagles no longer believed in the sun. Later, most of these divine creatures migrated to the wind elemental plane. Perhaps a few Eastern giant eagles lived in other material planes. The Eastern giant eagles loved to fly towards the sun every morning. However, although the Eastern wind god eagle had disappeared from the material plane, their descendants still existed. For example, the Hagen's giant eagle could reach a height of 2.5 to 3 meters, with a wingspan of more than 8 meters. An adult Hagen's giant eagle would have the power of a grade 3 Hagen's giant eagle. A small number of powerful Hagen's giant eagles could reach the pinnacle of grade 3. Many wizard organizations like to sign contracts with these Hagen's giant eagles. These Hagen's giant eagles had the intelligence of a human and were very powerful. After Su Len and Hathaway cleaned up the berserk elementals, they began to repair the remaining spatial cracks. Due to the explosion, in addition to tearing a large number of cracks in the spatial barrier of the demiplane, the area of the demiplane had also expanded several times. This was also one of the reasons why Su Len was conducting experiments here. Even if the experiment failed, he could still expand the demiplane. If the demiplane was expanded normally, it would take decades or even centuries to expand to its current extent. Now that the elemental furnace had exploded, it saved a lot of time. Although it also caused the demiplane's spatial barrier to be severely damaged and polluted, it could still be repaired with some time. The wind was howling. Dimensional storms appeared around Su Len, and the energy barrier on the surface of his body kept flashing. In less than a minute, Su Len's energy barrier had been hit dozens of times. The dimensional storms were raging, and the energy barrier on the surface of Su Len's body quickly dimmed under the continuous attacks. Finally, with a light bang, it completely shattered. However, before this energy barrier was completely shattered, another energy barrier had risen from Su Len's body. The spatial crack in front of them was severely damaged. The huge crack was fragmented by the explosion, and there were a lot of spatial fragments around it. These spatial fragments were shaken by the dimensional storms. In the demiplane, the ground nearby had collapsed into countless boulders. Because of the severe spatial cracks, the gravity here had become very unstable. No, it should be said that it was chaotic. The gravity in some places had increased by several times, but in some places, the gravity on the ground had completely disappeared. In some places, the gravity was entangled with each other and spread in all directions. The spatial barrier here was severely damaged. In the past month or so, this spatial crack showed no signs of recovery. In fact, the spatial crack here was getting bigger and bigger. If no one repaired it, this space would completely shatter. If left alone, the spatial crack would keep expanding, and the entire demiplane would eventually turn into nothingness. Su Len's body shone brightly, and then, a magic barrier rose from his body and blocked the huge spatial crack in front of him. The power of the dimensional storms in this spatial crack had already reached the 8th circle. It could be said that Su Len was being bombarded by 8th circle spells every minute. Fortunately, Su Len was powerful. He could resist all these spells. A huge boulder flew towards Su Len at an extremely fast speed. Su Len's eyes flashed, and then, lightning flashed in his eyes. The next second, a bolt of lightning appeared out of nowhere and fiercely hit that huge boulder. The boulder, which was the size of a carriage, was instantly torn apart under the bombardment of the lightning. Then, it was sucked into a spatial storm and instantly turned into fine dust, disappearing without a trace. "What is that?" Hathaway suddenly said, pointing not far away. Su Len looked up and saw that in that dark space, the space of the demiplane was continuously shrinking. The other side of the demiplane had already become a chaotic void zone, and the berserk spatial power was continuously eroding the demiplane. This was the demiplane that Su Len had transformed. It was constantly collapsing and had no power to resist the dimensional storms. This spatial crack was very dangerous. "Hathaway, be careful," Su Len said in a deep voice. "Don't worry. You also have to be careful. Leave a spatial coordinate here. If you can't resist it, immediately teleport back," Hathaway said solemnly. Lightning domain. Powerful lightning power instantly gushed out of Su Len's body. The lightning domain instantly opened, and the tyrannical domain power instantly blocked the spatial crack. Those dimensional storms kept attacking the barrier of the lightning domain, but it was useless. These dimensional storms were firmly blocked by Su Len. Next, Hathaway started to quickly arrange a spatial runic array in the surroundings. Chapter 680. It took nearly half a year to repair the half-plane, and another 2 years to clean up the pollution. If it weren't for the high-grade demons, it would have taken even longer. The half-plane was heavily polluted. At first, Su Len and the others used neutralizing powder to purify it, but it wasn't very effective and could only weaken the pollution a little. It wasn't very effective against stubborn pollution. Most of the pollution in the half-plane was like this. In order to clean up the pollution, Hathaway finally used another method, which was to use a large amount of purifying water to wash the half-plane back and forth. This method could quickly dilute the pollution. If it was in a material plane, this method would remove the pollution, but at the same time, it would cause the pollution to spread. However, it was different in a half-plane. The half-plane was a sealed space, and the pollution couldn't spread at all. After using the purifying water, Su Len would directly open a space crack and let the polluted water flow into the void. The void's omnipresent space storm would completely tear the polluted water to shreds. There was no need to worry about the polluted water contaminating other places. The space storm would quickly split the water into molecules or even smaller particles. After a dozen or so cleanses, the Northwind Tower spent a lot of money and finally reduced the pollution to below the standard value. The rest of the pollution could only be slowly recovered with time. In fact, there was a faster way, which was to plant the Wisdom Ancient Tree in the half-plane. The Wisdom Ancient Tree's purification field would completely purify the whole plane. After a few years, the half-plane finally returned to normal. Then, the renovation plan began. This half-plane would be the logistics base of the Northwind Tower. It had been a few years since the last explosion of the elemental fusion furnace. In these years, Hathaway hadn't stopped experimenting with the elemental fusion furnace. Finally, a year ago, the elemental fusion furnace was completely perfected. The elemental fusion furnace wasn't big, but the energy it provided was almost endless. With the elemental fusion furnace, the floating city's energy problem was solved. The renovation work of the northern city had never stopped. In fact, the renovation work was getting faster and faster. This was mainly due to the increasing number of wizard apprentices in the Northwind Academy. These apprentices had completed their transformation from ordinary people to wizard apprentices and began to accept large amounts of missions to earn resources. And the safest and most profitable mission was to modify the floating city. Although the strength of these apprentice adepts was very low, they were still much stronger than the slaves and workers. The transformation work, which was originally quite difficult, began to speed up. At the same time, the water elementium circulation system, life circulation system, air circulation system, and other supporting systems of the floating city were completed under the combined efforts of the adepts. The progress of the entire floating city was quickly completed. By the time the elemental fusion furnace was completed, the main body of the floating city was almost finished. The original puzzle of the Northwind Tower also needed to be modified. The previous puzzle could only cover a range of 500 meters around the Northwind Tower. This kind of puzzle worked well, so Surin, Hathaway, and Alex worked together to upgrade the puzzle. This puzzle was upgraded into a man-made magic net. The man-made magic net relied on the elemental fusion furnace. With the support of powerful energy, this magic net controlled an area of 50 kilometers. This man-made magic net had all the functions of a magic net. After entering the range of the man-made magic net, those without permission would have their spellcasting ability greatly restricted. High-grade wizards would lose their spellcasting ability directly. High-grade wizards would also have their spellcasting ability greatly reduced. Only legendary wizards were basically unaffected. For those with permission, they only needed to use a small part of their power to cast certain spells. Moreover, being in the range of the magic net would also give them a boost in mana recovery. At the same time, they would also receive permanent spells such as Flight, Mage Armor, and Energy Deflection Force Field. These spells would always be there. In addition to the man-made magic net, the ecosystem of the floating city was also almost complete. After the various systems were installed, these systems would activate the ecosystem system. The range of the ecosystem system and the man-made magic net were the same. The ecosystem system would allow the floating city to maintain an environment similar to that of the main material plane in any environment. At the same time, it could block the outside environment from affecting the floating city. With the ecosystem system, the floating city could enter the astral plane. Low-grade wizards and ordinary humans who were not strong enough would not die from extreme environments. In fact, if ordinary people could live in the astral plane for a long time, there were still many benefits. After all, the astral plane was filled with a large amount of source energy. This was the most basic energy in the multiverse. Even if one did not have the aptitude to become a wizard, after removing the source energy for a long time, they would still gain a lot of benefits. During the period of the Arcane Empire, many floating cities would enter the astral plane for a fixed period of time. In addition to collecting materials, another reason was to promote human evolution. After coming into contact with the source energy, the human soul would evolve under the influence of the source energy. These evolved humans would gain psionic abilities. Just like the Githyankis who lived in the astral plane, they were born with psionic talents and could become psionicists. These evolved humans were also called astral humans. If they completely adapted to life in the endless sea of stars and truly became an astral race, then over time, more psionic talents would be injected into their genes. However, if they left the astral plane and returned to the material plane, then this psionic talent would gradually disappear. If they lived in the material plane for too long and did not enter the astral plane, astral humans would also transform back into ordinary humans. Of course, this talent did not completely disappear, but was hidden in their genes. Once they entered the astral plane again, this ability would be reawakened. After several years of hard work, Sullen's floating city finally took shape. After the energy source of the floating city was completed, the next step was to install the most important floating ring of the floating city. Lifting up a city required a very high level of technology. At the same time, it also required a lot of precious materials. Fortunately, the underground world was rich in mineral resources. After accumulating a lot of precious resources over the years and purchasing a lot of materials through trade, this large floating ring was finally built. Chapter 681. Northern Wasteland. Northgard City. Early in the morning, the soldiers of Northern Town appeared on the streets of the city. The residents of Northern Town felt strange. Soon, the inner city was completely under martial law. No one was allowed to get close, and the whole city was in a state of alert. There was a 50-meter barrier between the inner city and the outer city. At the city gate, all caravans were forbidden to enter. At the same time, many people were sent out of the city in batches. Although they were puzzled by the situation, they left with the soldiers. Sullen's control of the whole city was not just for show. The whole city would act as soon as he gave the order. Soon, the evacuation of Northern Town was completed. Even the original soldiers retreated to the city wall. Accompanied by strong elemental fluctuations, a muffled sound was heard, and the whole ground shook violently. In the Tower of the North Wind, Hathaway was wearing a gorgeous wizard robe and standing on the astrology platform. Next to her were Chris, Alex, Karina, Grace, and the others. On the other side was Sue Len. On the astrology platform, a huge amount of elemental energy was constantly gathering toward the wizard tower. The elemental energy in the entire wizard tower was almost condensed. With the strong energy, the energy nodes in the wizard tower were quickly activated, and the energy channels were shining with a faint light. Activate the elemental furnace. Elemental furnace igniting. Igniting complete. Elemental furnace igniting. Floating space tower charging. Safety check in progress. All procedures are operating normally. Floating space ring charging. Main floating space ring activated. Main floating space ring operating normally. Prepare to take off. Hathaway was surrounded by strong energy. The originally loose wizard robe was also supported by this energy. Her body floated directly under this strong elemental energy. Hathaway nodded to Sue Len. Then, lightning flashed on Sullen's body, and a spiritual light rushed to the sky. The golem army in the wizard tower was busy. Andre, Lorraine, and several other wizards were constantly commanding the golems to work. Magical-looking metal constructs were transported to various locations in the city. Start assembling the floating space city. Prepare to activate the auxiliary floating ring. In other parts of the floating city, the wizards were waiting for orders. After receiving Sullen's order, they said in a serious tone, "The Northwind Tower is ready. It's our turn now. Charge it immediately." With the command of this magus, the energy crystals around them slowly lit up. Surging elemental energy immediately entered, and the runic array on the ground was activated at this moment. In the center of the runic array, the silver-white floating ring also began to flicker with spiritual light. The bottom of the floating city is separating. The underground of Northgard City had long been hollowed out. Back then, the Grey Dwarves had dug out tunnels under Northgard City and connected them with special constructs. It could be said that the floating city was now completely supported by these constructs. On the astrology platform, a three-dimensional virtual image of the entire floating city appeared before everyone's eyes. At this time, below the virtual image of the floating city, there were red dots marked, which were the link constructs. Begin automaton separation, Su Len said in a deep voice. With his command, the many red dots at the bottom of the floating city began to separate. In just a few breaths, all the link constructs had completed their separation. The entire floating city shook slightly, then stabilized in an instant. However, a large number of cracks had appeared in the connecting area between the floating city and Northgard City. Many of the edges were already showing signs of collapse. The original inner city of Northgard City was completely broken. Countless rocks slid down, as if the entire ground was about to sink. However, at this moment, a spiritual light rose, followed by a powerful force that enveloped the entire floating city. After shaking slightly, the floating city began to slowly rise, and the speed of the rise was getting faster and faster. In just a few breaths of time, the entire floating city had risen nearly a meter in height. Activate anti-gravity force field. Begin ascension. The surging elemental energy was quickly consumed, and with a strong energy fluctuation, the entire city rose directly under the effect of this force. A large number of rock fragments fell from the floating city, and a foundation made entirely of obsidian was revealed. The edges of the floating city continued to crack, and a large number of rocks fell down, constantly making loud noises. With the rise of the floating city, many empty spaces appeared in the floating city. These empty spaces were naturally elemental constructs that had not been installed yet. After the floating city rose to a certain height, the people who had been waiting at the astrology platform immediately began to work. One by one, the completed components were moved over and then installed in order. With a series of metal clanging sounds, these construct components were linked together one after another. After connecting these magic constructs, the energy channels were also connected. After the energy reached here, these construct components also began to operate. Mud to stone. Dozens of spells rose, and the originally soft ground in the floating city began to quickly transform under the effect of this magic, gradually turning into hard rock. The entire floating city's foundation was fused together under the effect of these spells. Hardening. Hardening. A series of spells flashed from Sullen's body, and the original rock immediately became stronger under the effect of the hardening spell. In just a few breaths, the entire floating city was buffed with a large number of hardening spells. Outside Northern Town City, hundreds of thousands of people were looking at everything in shock. Countless people saw a city the size of a small mountain fly up, and their faces turned ashen. There were also many people who knelt on the ground and cried out that this was a miracle. The city is flying. Unbelievable. Miracle. This is a miracle. Is this a god? There was a burst of exclamations, and the people of the northern city were stunned at this moment. Even the clergy in the northern city were tongue-tied. In their eyes, a city the size of a small mountain flew up from the ground. This was a power that only gods could use. When they saw Su Len perform it, they were greatly shocked. Is this the power of a wizard? A large number of adventurers in the city muttered to themselves. The little red dragon Onyxvia looked at everything in front of her with a shocked face. She naturally knew about the floating city, but she did not expect her master to have built a floating city. In her heart, she was even more in awe of her master. In the sky, a strong storm completely blew away the surrounding clouds, and powerful energy gathered around the city. Chapter 682. Strong elemental energy fluctuations gathered near the floating city, bringing with them strong winds. The floating city floated in the air like a divine kingdom. The elemental fusion furnace kept sending energy out, and the floating city began to operate at full capacity. After Su Len tested most of the functions of the floating city, he began to control the floating city to descend. The floating city shook slightly and landed in its original position. If it weren't for some rock fragments at the edge of the floating city, many people would have suspected that everything was an illusion. The successful construction of the floating city made Su Len and the others very happy. It cost a lot of money to build the floating city, and now it was finally completed. Su Len didn't hide his testing this time, showing off his muscles. After the floating city's test was completed, most of the forces on the continent knew immediately. Their attitude toward Northwind Tower naturally needed to be adjusted. Northwind Principality. After a few years of development, it had become very prosperous. Although there were only 4 cities in the principality, the total population had reached an astonishing 1.5 million. Deepwater City was the most populous city. This port city had become very prosperous because of the sea trade. The permanent population of the city had exceeded 500,000, and several small towns had appeared around the city. Most of the people living in these small towns were craftsmen. The prosperity of the sea trade caused an endless stream of merchants to come here. Some clever merchants began to set up some workshops near Deepwater City to produce all kinds of goods. Although the goods in Northwind City were good, they were limited. There were too many merchants who came to buy, and every time, the supply couldn't meet the demand. After many merchant ships came here, they couldn't buy enough goods to fill the cargo ships. For merchants, a voyage without a full cargo was a loss. Therefore, many merchants who couldn't buy enough goods from Northwind City would buy other goods in Deepwater City. Although these goods were far less popular than those in Northwind City and the profits were lower, it was better than nothing. Among them, the most popular was refined salt, a specialty of Deepwater City. Deepwater City produced a light yellow refined salt without any bitterness. The quality was much better than rock salt mixed with a lot of impurities. Although it wasn't as good as blue salt, it was still very good. As a result, Deepwater City became even more prosperous. In addition, Deepwater City also produced a variety of dried seafood. The sea area near Deepwater City happened to be at the intersection of the cold north wind current and the warm south current. 2 ocean currents converged here, bringing rich nutrients. A large number of fish thrived here, and any fishing boat could fill it up after a few trips. Deepwater City's fishery was rich in sturgeon. This kind of fish meat was fat and tender and was very popular. In addition, Deepwater City was rich in salt, so a large number of sturgeon would be pickled and sold as salted fish. Although dried salted fish didn't taste as good as freshly caught fish, it was salted. Salt was indispensable for anyone. Plus, it wasn't expensive. Moreover, salted fish was a type of meat, which was a very good food for commoners. Therefore, the salted fish from Deepwater City quickly became popular in the Southern Sea region. Even Beifeng Principality had a large number of salted fish for sale. The population of Mirror Lake City in the Southern Sea region wasn't inferior to Northgard City in the slightest. Moreover, relying on Mirror Lake next to it, millions of mu of fertile land had been cultivated here. It could be said that this place had become another large granary in a few years. Since the construction of the floating city in Northgard City was completed, more and more people wanted to live in Northgard City. However, it wasn't as easy as it was a few years ago. The City Hall of Northgard City had greatly increased the requirements. If it weren't for this, the population of Northgard City would have broken through the million mark long ago. The floating city's appearance made Northgard City the focus of the entire continent. Northgard City also had a new name: Magic City. Northgard City, as the capital of Beifeng Principality, had become unprecedentedly prosperous. In the sky, a group of winged dragon knights flew quickly. This was the Winged Dragon Guard of Northgard City. Every winged dragon knight was at the peak of the 4th rank. On the wide and orderly streets, a large number of clay golems and rock golems were at work. Occasionally, a few steel golems would appear. The steel golems didn't look clumsy. Instead, their bodies were slender and graceful. They had humanoid faces. Their surfaces had a silvery white metallic luster, and there were many golden red patterns on them. The steel golems' foreheads were embedded with blue gems. Complex and precise runes were engraved on them. Their bodies moved nimbly, full of a sense of technology. These steel golems had been optimized and upgraded. Not only did they have powerful physical attacks, but they also had energy attacks. Apart from the fact that they couldn't fly, they were almost identical to Iron Man Floating City. This place, which was known as the capital of magic, looked like a fantasy city. In the Adept Tower, translucent magic bridges appeared out of thin air. These magic bridges were completely made of pure light, forming a closed loop around the Adept Tower. On these closed loops were strange purple magic crystals. At this time, these magic crystals were orbiting around the Adept Tower according to a specific pattern. Rich elemental energy filled the entire floating city. Next to the Adept Tower was a huge garden. When the breeze blew, the lush magic plants swayed slightly. A strong floral fragrance assaulted one's nose. This was the arcane garden Su Len had built in the past. There were fountains, fake mountains, exotic flowers, and all sorts of other things. Around the Adept's Tower, other buildings were scattered all over the place. Energy channels connected these buildings with the Adept's Tower. Countless runes combined to form arcane chains that shrouded the entire floating city, forming an extremely intricate and complicated net. Enigma Matrix, man-made weave. Many of the wonders combined with the floating city to form a powerful floating city. Many adepts who had been here called this place an arcane wonder. The whole city was very clean and tidy. It was completely built with obsidian. There were flower beds on both sides of the city. The architectural style was ancient, but also had some magical architectural styles. There were even some sci-fi styles from the previous world. On the other side of the city, 3 artificial lakes the size of a football field appeared in front of them. These artificial lakes were the water circulation system of the floating city. Under the effect of the runes, the sewage was purified and reappeared here. Above the 3 artificial lakes, spatial runes shrouded the area. Inside was the original secret realm around the northern citadel. Su Len and Hathaway spent a lot of effort to connect this secret realm to the floating city. P.S. Thank you, dear readers, for your love and support. This book is about to come to an end. Chapter 683. The northern town Mysterious Plain was connected to the floating city, and the Mysterious Plain was divided into a few areas. Xanthi was in charge of the botanical garden, and the wisdom tree was planted there. With the wisdom tree, the entire botanical garden was covered in a layer of plants. All the plants could grow here. At the same time, the amethyst bees were also multiplying in the garden, and there was a lot of amethyst honey produced every month. The amethyst honey had become an important resource for the Northern Wind Tower. As the wisdom tree grew, a pool of spring water appeared around it. It was the Vitality Spring water. The Vitality Spring was the initial form of the Fountain of Youth. As time passed, the wisdom tree would grow stronger, and the quality of the Vitality Spring would increase. When the wisdom tree grew into an ancient tree, the Vitality Spring would become the Fountain of Youth. Of course, this was not the end. The ancient tree would continue to grow. When it evolved into a tree of life, it would produce the Fountain of Life. Not only could it increase one's lifespan by 1,000 years, but it could also strengthen one's body. Every time such a treasure appeared, people would fight over it. With the wisdom tree, the taste of some of the magic fruits in the botanical garden had also improved. It could be said that the wisdom tree had directly improved the environment and production of magic fruits in the botanical garden by a large margin. The other part of the mysterious plain was the ecological garden. The ecological garden was very large. After all, it had completely merged with another mysterious plain. Su Len and Hathaway had paid a great price to merge the mysterious plain that sealed the abomination. They had also modified the Wizard Tower, which became the control center of the ecological garden. This Adept Tower could adjust the environment and climate of the ecological garden. It could monitor the entire ecological garden at any time and place. A large number of creatures were kept in captivity in the ecological garden, including dinosaurs, wyverns, violent beasts, magical beasts, radiation aberrations, and so on. There were dozens of species and hundreds of different creatures. The floating city already had its first batch of residents. They were the wizards from the Northern Wind Academy. The floating city was designed to accommodate 50,000 to 100,000 people. Su Len planned to take his time to choose. Of course, in addition to the ordinary people, he also had to bring his kin, such as Duergar, Drows, half-elves, centaurs, and other races. After all, the total population of these races was not large. On the other side of the floating city, there was a magnificent marble palace, and there was a tall triumphal arch in the square in front of the palace. There were many reliefs carved on the triumphal arch, and there were also many statues in front of the palace behind it. These statues had a power similar to divine power. This was the power of faith, which was different from divine power. The power of faith was a very pure power, and standing nearby, one could feel the unyielding faith. These statues were the statues of all the people who had sacrificed themselves since the founding of the city. The stronger ones were at the third or fourth stage, while the weaker ones were only at the first stage. This was a place where only the brave martyrs could enter. There weren't many statues in the hall at the moment, so the heroic spirits that entered would be revived in the martyr's palace. The strength of a heroic spirit was related to the amount of power of faith. This was one of the reasons why Su Len had to recruit so many ordinary people. Another reason was to increase the number of newborns with adept potential. There was an arcane garden in the floating city. The arcane garden had a special property that could increase the percentage of newborns with adept potential. If it weren't for the fact that the floating city could only hold a limited number of people, Su Len would have wanted to hold hundreds of thousands of people. In a few years, the floating city would have a large number of newborns with wizard potential, which would be very helpful in increasing the overall strength of the floating city. Above the square, a dazzling ball of light floated in the air. It was a golden sun. Of course, it was not a real sun, but an artificial one. It was a legendary magic creation, made by Hathaway using a large number of rare materials and a star core. This artificial sun was emitting a golden halo, surrounded by a circle of golden runes. The sun was not dazzling, but it was very gentle. However, no one dared to underestimate this sun. There was a huge amount of energy sealed in this sun that made one's heart palpitate. If all of it was released, it would not be any weaker than an elemental fusion furnace explosion. Corona. Elemental fusion star core. Legendary creation. Behind this sun was a hidden space, in which there was a silver plate-like moon. At this time, the moon did not appear in this space, but was hidden. Moonstar. Eye of the Weave. Legendary creation. The moonstar was connected to the weave, which was a very important energy hub. The corona was also connected to the man-made weave, and the two artificial stars could borrow the power of the weave. There were also hundreds and thousands of light spots of various sizes hidden in the sky. These light spots only lit up at night, and were the stars of the floating city. These stars were actually all nodes of the man-made weave. The weave was crisscrossed with a large number of energy nodes. These energy nodes had been transformed into stars by Hathaway, and together with the corona and moonstar, they formed the sky of the floating city. This sky was not for show, but was a battle system of the floating city. The corona and moonstar revolved around each other, which could mobilize the power of the weave. The weave was originally upgraded with the Enigma, so naturally it also had the power of the Enigma. These suns, moons, and stars were the means of attack of the man-made weave. Countless stars, suns, and moons formed an extremely complex network. It was like an incomparably intricate runic array. Under the control of the astrology platform, it could attack the outside world with the power of a level 10 spell. After continuous optimization, this man-made weave's attack power could reach the level of level 11 at most. Of course, in addition to attacking, this system was also a huge defensive construct. All kinds of energy linked together, and after activation, it could envelop the entire city. The defensive power of the energy barrier was very strong, and it could withstand a full-strength attack of the floating city. In fact, the floating city's defensive power was weaker than its offensive power. This could not be helped. Current magical research and technological research had not found a sufficiently strong defensive measure. Therefore, the main body of the floating city was extremely hard. All the buildings were made of obsidian, which had high magic resistance and strong physical defense. At the same time, the obsidian was hardened. After this operation, the main body of the floating city was strong enough to withstand an attack of that level. Chapter 684. The Duchy of Beifeng became more and more prosperous. The large influx of people allowed the Duchy of Beifeng to obtain sufficient labor force. Millions of acres of farmland had been cultivated. This allowed Beifeng City to obtain a large amount of raw materials. The deep-water port had become the busiest port in Beifeng City, and it was also the port with the largest population. During this period, many churches had come to test him from all directions. As Sullen's strength increased, he had attracted the attention of the gods. After seeing the powerful divine power in Su Len, these gods thought that Su Len was planning to become a god, and the Duchy of Beifeng was likely to be his future church. Su Len directly responded to these hints. After all, he did not plan to become a god. He did not seek a clergy or godhood. Compared to becoming a god, Su Len preferred his current life. Gods did not only have power, but also represented a kind of responsibility. At the same time, if Su Len became a god, he could not travel freely. The arrival of the elemental tide had changed the entire world. The most obvious change was that the difficulty of breaking through to the legendary level had decreased. Originally, there were only 3 legendary level powerhouses in a kingdom, and the most was 5. However, in the past few years, the Kingdom of Florence had 4 new legendary level powerhouses. These newly promoted legendary masters originally wanted to redivide the Kingdom of Florence. In the end, Su Len personally went to talk to these people about life and ideals. Su Luan convinced them with reason and successfully interrupted them. He crossed out the word ba, which moved these people and made them fully realize their mistakes. After feeling sullen sincerity, these legendary masters took the initiative to express that the current situation was very good. They would absolutely support the rule of His Majesty Su Len and Her Majesty Queen Phyllis. Having a duchy and a kingdom was enough to support Sullen's floating city. The surging elemental energy quickly gathered, and the whole floating city rose again. After some repairs, Su Len and Hathaway controlled the floating city to rise again. Their goal this time was to head to the astral boundary. Bringing the entire floating space city into the astral plane consumed an astonishing amount of energy. The elemental fusion furnace was operating at full capacity, and an unimaginable amount of elemental energy gushed out. A large amount of elemental energy was consumed, and even the elemental energy in the surrounding space was extracted in large quantities. A small elemental tide appeared here. On the astrology platform, a dazzling spiritual light shot up into the sky. The spiritual light tore through the sky, and a powerful soul fluctuation was transmitted. A giant portal appeared, and then the huge floating city entered it. In the boundless astral world, darkness, deathly stillness, and emptiness were the eternal colors of this place. Occasionally, 1 or 2 comets would fly past at high speed. There was very little matter here. There was no air, no gravity, no water, and not even a sound. Everything was deathly still. At this moment, in the depths of the astral world, a dot of starlight flashed. Then, a huge bubble suddenly appeared in the void. If someone saw it, they would know that someone was traveling through space. The bubble expanded rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, it had expanded by more than 10 times. Soon, the outline of a city appeared in the bubble. Accompanied by a flash of spiritual light, the bubble slowly disappeared, and a huge city appeared in front of them. It was Sullen's floating space city. Although this floating space city was very large in the material plane, it was as inconspicuous as a speck of dust in the astral world. Is this the astral world? Alex, who had come to the astral world for the first time, looked outside curiously. It's not that great. It doesn't feel as beautiful as the material plane. But there's so much source energy here. I feel like my spellcasting ability has directly increased by a level. That's natural. Source energy can be directly integrated into the soul, Su Len explained. It's good, but it's too dark around here, Alex said. Su Len smiled slightly. The astral world has always been like this. Don't think that the astral world is empty, dark, and deathly still. There are still many creatures living in the astral world, such as the astral whale, Githian, evil god, abomination, or other astral world travelers. It's still very dangerous here. Many ancient dragons that can't live in the prime material plane will also move their lairs to the astral world. In addition, there are space-time storms, spatial cracks, and so on. So be careful in the astral world, Su Len said to them. Hathaway stood on the astrology platform and observed the surrounding astral world through the large starfinder on the astrology platform. This thing was specially built by Hathaway for the floating space city to travel in the astral world. The starfinder could observe all kinds of energy and matter in the astral world. It could be used for warning and detection, and at the same time it could be used to find planes. Next to the starfinder was a 3-dimensional virtual imaging system, and on it was a star map of the astral world around the floating space city. This star map had just been created, and there was only the surrounding information. As a newbie who had just entered the astral world, there was no star map, so they could only draw it themselves. Su Len was now a little regretful that he didn't meet an astral merchant and buy a star map from them. As merchants who traveled in various planes all year round, astral merchants had the most accurate star maps. Although it was impossible for them to take out the most accurate star maps to trade, it was much better to have a rough star map than now. Hathaway kept using the starfinder to observe the astral world and recorded the coordinates of the astral world on the star map. Next to the star map, a bright spot appeared, which was the newly recorded coordinates of the astral world. Astral world travel often used astral world coordinates for ultra-long distance teleportation. Because of the scarcity of materials in the astral world, it was very easy to use teleportation spells. With the help of astral world coordinates, it was easy to use teleportation spells and cross hundreds of millions of kilometers in a very short time. There were even special stargates that could teleport even further. After entering the astral world, the entire floating space city was in a closed state. A powerful energy barrier enveloped the entire floating space city. In order to make the people in the city live closer to the material plane, this barrier would show the scene of the sky. Of course, this was all an illusion. The original corona and the lunar star also represented the sun and the moon, respectively. With them, the entire floating space city had a day and night division, and the living environment was very similar to the main material plane. Now that the floating space city is completed, there's nothing important to do next. After a while, let's go to the surrounding star region. Su Len said with a smile. That's for sure. I also want to go to other material planes to have a look. Maybe I can find some things left by the Arcane Kingdom, Hathaway said. Then our next goal is to find the Arcane Kingdom. Su Len said aloud. Agreed. End of the book.